Call to order the Stokes County Board of Commissioners Planning and Community Development Meeting, Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020 at 7 o'clock. As always, we'll start off the invocation. I'll ask Commissioner Lincoln if he would lead us.
Okay, let us pray. Heavenly Father, as we come before Thee this night, we ask Thy blessings upon each one this year, upon this meeting. Give us wisdom and understanding of what our role is for the community, and always let us be guided by Your wisdom and Your knowledge. And let us always praise You every day, because You, the Almighty God, that we love, and You are the one that we look to for all things. But we just ask You to be with us during this meeting. Go with us now and lead, guide, and direct. For we ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Please continue to stand for our pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll start off with approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Now move on to our public comments. If you would, you have about 3 minutes to talk. When you come up, just say your name and address, and we'll start with Valencia Bullins.
Good evening. This is the first time I've ever done this, so I'm here concerning the solar farm, and my name is Valencia Bullins. I own a large tract of land that adjoins the west side of the proposed solar plan. My property shares a common creek with a proposed solar farm. A major concern of mine is a lack of county ordinance and oversight regarding these large-scale solar farms. It was apparent in the zoning meeting that there were more questions than answers in regard to how the county would handle specific situations. Therefore, the decision by the zoning board was an interesting one. A predominant point of concern regards the future. What happens when these solar farms are decommissioned? What happens to the metal, the glass, the fencing? Who oversees the decommissioning? As I understand it, the property owner would see the necessary steps are implemented at the end of the lease. But suppose the energy company changes hands, suppose environmental issues arise and the energy company is not responsive. Will there be routine water testing of the retention ponds to assure there is no contamination from herbicides or other chemicals? Testing of the retention ponds to assure there's no contamination from PFOS, PFOA, Gen X, cadmium, telluride. If you have questions about what these acronyms and compounds are, perhaps more discussion is necessary. Another question, who monitors the implementation of the bond before decommissioning? At the end of life, who is making sure it's done right? Agriculture and solar energy could coexist, but our county needs to lay the responsible groundwork for making sure that we can have it, so that we can, at the very least, have a way to mediate through any potential grievances that would arise in the coming years. The project on Fowler Road in Walnut Cove has not been the best example. Going forward, decisions you make now can affect what happens at the end of life with these farms. What we do not want to see is unused structure littering the landscape, retention ponds, and soil with contamination, disassembled or outdated structures with nowhere to be recycled. As commissioners, please do your part to secure the beauty that our county affords. If solar farms are in our future, possibly an acreage cap, allocation of a set amount of acreage dedicated to solar farm usage within the county. Let Stokes County be a leader in the best practices to ensure that developers, landowners, farmers, and citizens are equally represented. Again, my concerns stem from the fact that the proposed farm adjoins my land. Bear Branch Solar has reached out to me and hopefully will be addressing concerns that I have with the initial setback proposal. This demonstrates to me that they, Bear Branch, is trying to do what's necessary to be a good neighbor. But let's also make sure that our county has the proper groundwork to protect everyone. And I thank you.
All right, thank you, ma'am. That was the only speaker we have for public comments. Now move on to the public hearing, the presentation by Mr. David Suthers.
Good evening. The first presentation we have tonight for the case, the rezoning petition, is for the Denny Family Trust, is to rezone approximately 1.723 acres from residential agricultural to residential agricultural conditional zoning for the purpose of subdividing the property for a one-lot major subdivision for a single-family home. The property owner is Denny Family Trust, and the applicant is Clayton Homes, Wayne Ratcliffe. This is a portion of a 7.63 acre tract. Does everybody know where this is located? Right basically where Denny Road comes out into Highway 66, across from where the boat repair and trailer that was, we've been through zoning hearings on that in the past 10, 12 years. This property has been approved for a 3-bedroom home by Environmental Health, and the driveway access would be off of Highway 66. Emergency services would be coming from the King area. And the surrounding land use is residential with commercial across the road. Mixed use is up and down NC Highway 66 in the King area there around Chestnut Grove Road. The reason the petition is stated is the subdivision regulations allows me to approve up to so many lots per parent parcel. And at this time, this would exceed that number. I've spoke to the planning board. We may need to address is the 25 years has gone by since the subdivision regulations were put into place, and some of the reasons that these standards were in place then were to cover specific things that were coming up. We may readdress this to allow a little more flexibility, because as long as they have road frontage on the state road and can comply with everything else, this is more procedural than there usually is an issue with the actual request. But as we went through this from the planning department or planning staff, we don't have any problem with this request. It'll meet the minimum lot size. Public water is available, and again, they have septic approval for a 3-bedroom home. The planning board recommended this unanimously, 8-0. Felt that the proposed lot would be consistent with the Stokes 2035 plan for the development in the area, and that it was a reasonable request. The applicant had a public information meeting on the 24th of February at 6 p.m. And you've got attachment B there for minutes. I think they had one person show up and didn't have a problem with the request. Do you have any questions for me? I don't think a representative of the Clayton Homes is here tonight. They came to the planning board to answer any questions. There were no questions really concerning this proposal.
Any questions or comments from the board? I believe we're good on that one.
All right, any motions, please? I'll remind you of this every time. Please make all your motions for approval or disapproval based referencing the petition's consistency or non-consistency with the Stokes 2035 plan, and that it is a reasonable request.
I have a motion on this one.
We approve. And it is consistent with the 2035 plan for our county. Second that motion.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Let's see, moving on to the rezoning request. Now we've already done that one. Which one's the next one here? Is it Mr. Stewart? Clayton.
We just did this one.
Yeah, we just did that one.
What is this? This would be.
That's the stuff for, as a letter. from somebody, I guess it's from Clayton Homes. Move on to attachment C then. It's the rezone request, conditional rezone request, Adam Stewart, number 20-156.
Ready? All right, we've got two from Adam Stewart, don't want to get them confused. This first one is to rezone approximately 6.09 acres from residential agricultural to highway business conditional zoning for mini storage warehouses and climate-controlled storage facilities. The owner and applicant are Adam Stewart. The property is located on NC Highway 865, approximately 700 foot west of the intersection of NC Highway 865 in Germantown. The total tract is 6.74 acres and the proposed parcel is 6.09. The property is currently vacant. And I'm gonna assume everybody knows this site when you come down. Adam has been here before with other petitions. The last one, I think we had the Dollar General, which is the site was Dollar General. This is the property that's in between the Dollar General and Creekside Supply. It is the vacant property in between. The property, there's a small portion of the property that is, well, there's a portion of the property in the rear that is in the floodplain, but there is no proposal as you see on your maps. Now, you have small maps available, and I have some larger ones. If you want to look at them, I'll be glad to provide you a couple of them. Y'all can spread them out. Just let me know. But there's no construction or proposed construction within the floodplain area or storage. It's not in a watershed district. And there's no septic or water approval. We do have public water there, but we don't have septic. And the problem with this whole property that Adam has been able to develop was the lack of septic. And this is what's caused the need for coming up with ideas that would be able to utilize the property for commercial purposes that didn't need septic. Well, mini storage warehouses is probably one of the few things that can be done on the property that doesn't require septic approval. He has had the site evaluated, and I went out for an initial evaluation when he did Creekside, and there's not a lot of area in Germantown, in that particular part of Germantown, that would be suitable for septic disposal. Emergency services, rural all-volunteer fire department, EMS out of Walnut Cove. No erosion control will be necessary until he actually begins construction. In the state controls, there were some questions at the planning board hearing concerning water runoff and potentials. There will be some, during the construction process, there will be some erosion control measures, some sediment ponds will be developed. They'll be removed at the site, but all this will be approved and monitored by the state of North Carolina, as we don't have that expertise in the county level. Access to the property, there you see a DOT letter in the first that was approved on March 18th, 2020, granting access that was currently serving the Dollar General. It was always, when that access was granted from the Dollar General, that proposal was made. If you know that driveway, you can see that it was made to serve this, the remainder of this property. Again, there's no real problem with this. This is what it was suited for. DOT given approval letter based on those specifications that they, if you'd like to read what they required Mr. Stewart to do or will require him to do. Again, in this area, we have mixed uses. We have residential. We have a lot of commercial. And that goes from the county line all the way to Walnut Cove, 8 and 65. When it turns into 65 going straight to Walnut Cove, there's mixed uses up and down the road. So it is consistent with that. As always, you want to consider the impacts of any commercial development that we bring in on surrounding development, the consistency with the plan, impact on surrounding community, infrastructure, increase in commercial tax base, potential opportunities for employment, community acceptance, and traffic generation. There's approximately 11,000 cars in the last average daily traffic count right in that general area there. And if you've been down there, there are lots of, I mean, that's a real busy road, lots of traffic, and good for his commercial type development where people will come in. I mean, you get run over down there. I wish they'd make the road a little bit wider. I was trying to put the signs out there and had my rear end out in the road a few times, and you really feel the wind especially on this piece of property because you got a bank that goes down. But lots of traffic, and from the staff standpoint, the applicant is proposing to construct 287 mini storage warehouse units, two 80 by 150 climate control storage facilities, one 40 by 175 foot covered car storage area, an open area for the storage of RVs and boats in the rear of the property. He's looking at doing it as a phased project. If you'll see on the map, you'll see phase 1 and phase 2. The applicant also had properties on down the road in front of the school bus garage, Creekside, Creekside self-storage. From talking to Adam, it's been fairly successful, and therefore he sees the need to build more units in the area. Again, from our standpoint, he has been approved for other commercial districts, and this is the only logical use of this property. It's infill, and from a planning standpoint, we have this area that he has developed, and this is the last parcel that can be developed in that area, and from a planning standpoint, that seems to be the appropriate use of the property for commercial. And the fact of the lack of sewage disposal, the mini storage warehouses seem to be an appropriate use. And the planning board voted 8-0 to recommend this statement. It was consistent with the Stokes 2035 plan. It was a reasonable request based on the fact it's adjacent to other commercial, and it is an infill type development. And the applicant is here if you'd like any specific questions. And like I said, if you'd like to see the larger map or detail, I'll be glad to give you the maps to spread out.
Any questions or comments from the board?
One thing, Mr. Chairman, as far as I know, the one, like you said, that he did before has worked out well.
Yeah.
We had some neighbors, I think, back then that
Something
had
about they
some
didn't want a
concern.
tree buffer, but I've not
Yeah.
really heard anything after the initial proposal. They've been constructed, and you can ask Adam about occupancy, but as far as I know, mini storage warehouses seem to be a good business to be in. There's quite a few of them in the county, and they all seem to, I've actually had more requests of people looking at them.
Now, the fact we haven't had any issues with the first one, I think speaks well for doing some more.
Yeah, and it was a similar situation with a piece of land that would not pass a soil evaluation for anything.
Any more questions, comments?
I'd make a comment. Adam has, I was on the planning board before when he asked for the other building that he wanted, and he's really a good businessman. And he's always what I consider done right and fair. So I know he'll do it on this one. Mr. Governor.
I have one comment as well. Adam, I appreciate you keeping your business here in Stokes County, and I wish you all the best of luck with these. I hope they stay full for you. And some good renters. Do I have a motion on this?
Yes. Make a motion to approve.
Based it on the plan and.
Yeah, based on a 2035 plan.
I have a second. Second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Now move on to item E. Rezone request. Let's get another from Mr. Stewart, number 20-157.
All right, we get the second phase of the project on this larger parcel here. A portion of this, if you'll look on your maps, adjacent to Creekside, which was on this vacant property, that the majority of it would be now utilized for mini storage warehouses and climate controlled facility. He wanted a portion of this to go back into the existing Creekside business, which if approved, would be combined into that parcel of land for the purposes of, on 0.65 acres of this, to to rezone this from residential agricultural to highway business conditional zoning for 4 greenhouses. And again, Adam's the owner and the applicant for this. And this is on the same side of the road, just about 400 foot farther down the road, 1,100 foot from the intersection of the road. The property now is currently vacant, as was the parcel with the mini storage warehouse proposal. The proposal to add greenhouses to the Creekside Supply Company property will not require an expansion of the septic disposal area, because they simply would be just going through the greenhouses and can utilize the facility which is in Creekside Supply. Again, any erosion control measures would be taken at the time of construction. The surrounding land use is basically the same as was stated before. We have mixed uses. We have, this would complete the infill of commercial development along this site. And I've got to say, from a standpoint, I remember going out to this site 20 years ago or more, and people wanted to do a haunted house. It was, Jake, remember, it was the Hartgrove property at one time, and it was just derelict property, grown up, an old house on it. We had to run the people off from doing an unsafe situation there. It's one of those pieces of property I never thought would get developed. And again, from our standpoint, this creates an infill of development which finishes the commercial aspect, which is something that's very good for the county. And as a proposal, to make sure that all the usable spot, there was no other good use for this property except for commercial, since we had so much around it. I'll not go, you know the existing businesses, and the issues to consider are basically the same as before. As always, you want to consider the impact of anything. The greenhouses will supplement Creekside Supply, giving him an opportunity to expand his market for sales and things in the area. Again, these are 4 30 by 80 foot greenhouse units on approximately 65 hundredths of an acre. Adam stated in the meeting that, he would build a couple of them and see how they go. He's proposing 4, but he wants to see, if they're going to work. And if they don't, it can be, it's just a portion of the property at that point. The planning board recommended by a vote of 8-0 to recommend approval based on the same statement that this is consistent with the Stokes 2035 plan and a reasonable request. Adam addressed there were concerns about access points. It is a difficult turn in there, and Adam has tried to do some internal work, but as far as the actual driveway access and anything that I have any say-so on through DOT is that driveway access was approved at the point Creekside Supply was zoned years ago. There's just tough when you come in there because people want to make an immediate turn where the building is situated. And if you look or pay attention, you come around and you go behind the building. There's adequate room to do it. It's just people don't read the signs. But there's really nothing on the end of being able to do anything much. That's a DOT issue, and Adam has complied with the standards he needs to have the driveway access there. He's got it paved right there before you go onto the gravel part. And I guess part of the problem is he has good business, so there's some issues sometimes with the traffic and everything. He had a public information on the same night as before, February 26, 2020. You can ask Adam about any questions or concerns that were brought up at the meeting on that. We would recommend this is to finish the infill of commercial development along NC Highway 8 and 65 in the Germantown area.
Any questions or comments on this one? I have a motion.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve this HBCZ, I guess it is, Adam Stewart, for greenhouses on 6.74, am I right on that?
0.65 acres.
0.65 acres, okay. I'll put that in form of motion.
And it is part of the 2035.
2035.
2035.
Consistent with the plan.
Yeah, consistent with the 2035 plan, Stokes County plan.
All right, I have a motion of a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Now move on to attachment G, the rezone request for Bear Branch Solar LLC, 20-158.
We're gonna need to let him set up a little bit.
All right, we can take
Longer in the planning board, so I'll go get him.
all right. What we'll do, we'll just take a quick recess, about 5 minutes. I'll call the meeting back to order. We'll go ahead and pick back up with there with attachment G, the rezone request for Bear Branch Solar LLC 20-15A.
All right. As you see before you, you have some maps, and the applicant will provide larger maps. They've been updated based on planning board information, so I'm gonna let them take care of that. But you have a general site map of the property, and this is Bear Branch Solar LLC is requesting to rezone approximately 499.4 acres of a 744.57 acre tract of land owned by Wilson Samuel Farms of Stokes County LLC from residential agricultural to M1 light manufacturing conditional zoning for a 35 megawatt AC utility scale solar photovoltaic facility. Property is located on the east side of Tuttle Road, approximately 850 foot south of the intersection of Fulp Road and Tuttle Road in Walnut Cove. Again, the site owners are Wilson Samuel Farms of Stokes County LLC, and the applicant is Bear Branch Solar LLC. Property is not currently addressed and is located off of Tuttle Road. Again, the request is coming to you as a conditional zoning, so you can talk about everything site specific. A portion of this land of the parcel is located in a flood hazard area along the Dan River. The portion of the parcel proposed to be utilized for solar panels, however, is located in a Zone X, which is an area determined to be outside the 500-year floodplain. It's not located in a drinking supply watershed area, and the site will not require septic or water approvals. Emergency Service, Walnut Cove EMS, and Walnut Cove Fire Department. Erosion control, the applicant is aware of the need for an approved erosion control plan from North Carolina to any land disturbing activities. This is standard procedure for any large-scale development or any building permit that is issued for disturbing 1 acre or more of land. Access to the property, the applicant would be required, to, if approved, to have access approval off of the state road, Tuttle Road, from North Carolina Department of Transportation. I look for average daily traffic counts on these secondary roads. We didn't really have any. They are secondary state roads, and everybody knows where Tuttle Road is. Kind of feeds into 311, and it's a good cut through to get back up to. I won't say a Walnut Cove bypass, but I use it all the time, so you don't have to go through town if you're heading back to Danbury. Surrounding land use, this parcel, or the project is located on a single parcel of land, and it has one access off the state road. The other portion of the property on the eastern side would be bordered by the Dan River. It is bordered by residential property. There are some houses to the north of it and agricultural property to the west and to the south. This was part of the old Harston Plantation property, and has remained this way. Well, I've been here for 32 years, and then that particular part of the road looks about the same as it did, except for some residences that have been developed a little bit north. You can go over the issues to consider. There is, you will have in your letter, I think Richard Brim provided something to Jake that Jake requested. You'll have a letter there concerning increase in tax due to commercial property and a rollback tax, the best utilization of the existing land, a sustainable energy source, short-term job creation, and should be considered the long-term effects of the project and compatibility with surrounding development. Again, it's site specific. You can talk about the site plan. They will provide an updated site plan. There were comments at the planning board. There were some concerns about potential runoffs. There were concerns about the decommissioning. There were concerns about the recycling of the materials used on the plant. And these come from the citizens that showed up at the planning board meeting. There was a pretty lengthy discussion concerning different issues along the property. Go over some of the brief things for the parcel. The applicant is proposing a project that would contain 114,372 solar panels. This information I received is off the platform from the developer. Tom, if there's any changes or anything in there, both the Toms, just go through it. What we're looking at is a 20-and-a-half-year lease with possible 4 or 5-year extensions. So the lifespan of the property could potentially, you're looking at 40-and-a-half years. The applicant, I think there were questions at the last time we had a hearing like this, what the solar panels would be. Hanwha Q cells or equivalent. I looked up some of this stuff, but it's panel is a panel. I'm not familiar with this, so it didn't mean a lot to me. The panels were approximately 3 by 6 in dimension, situated a maximum of 15 feet off the ground. They're adjustable to maximize the efficiency of the production of the energy. The applicant states in their submitted site plan the solar facility would be enclosed with fencing 6 foot tall with an additional 3 strands of barbed wire. Fencing is required. It is a power generating facility, so fencing it's not really an option. This is their proposal. There are some updates on this that the applicant will give, but as of today, and you'll see a letter in there from another attorney, Karen Kimmerwright, which she's been in front of the board before, addressing the fact that the facility has not received its approval from the Utilities Commission for the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity. It gives you the dates that it went through, the dates it was advertised in the newspaper, but a final disposition or approval has not been heard as of today. A utility substation will have to be constructed by Duke Energy. On the site plan, you see a proposed location. As with the last, Duke Energy has to approve this. They have not, as of yet, approved any utility substation to take the power generated by the solar facility to put it back into the grid. This is taken. This would be, I guess, will be taken care of by the applicant. But as of now, we don't have a specific approval from Duke Energy. Again, this site is a one single parcel. As before, we had multiple parcels, and it's stated for a different location in the county. Close, but not, it's different in its makeup. It's bordered by the river, a single road, a large tract, with a portion of the tract still wanting to be utilized for agricultural production. The approximately 500 acres that would be utilized would be the lease area for the solar farm, and there would be additional couple hundred acres to farm. I don't have planning staff, we didn't have a problem with the proposed location. Feel like it's a pretty good location for this type of facility based on some natural buffers. There was some issues brought up at the meeting about additional buffering based on adjacent properties with residential that could be taken care of if, should be taken care of if any approval process is granted by the board. This would need to be addressed. It's a secondary road. We don't have any current public or sewer facilities on the property. I think we had a potential plan that down the future there had been some look at maybe running a water connection, sitting in on some meetings that would go from 89 approximately down Total Road to 311. But those are a lot of proposals when we're talking about the water systems that are way in the future. But as far as infrastructure, is limited infrastructure in the area. This type of facility, if constructed, there's some short-term employment involved. You also got, I think, some information concerning that. The applicant had been in touch with Will Carter, our Economic Development Director. I spoke to Will briefly. We didn't have a long chat, but we did talk briefly today. And he could provide information. If approved, the applicant would submit information to him so that Will could get the word out for potential contract work or supplies, whatever the facility might need. The one impact that can't be determined at this time is the long-term effect on the surrounding community. The county has no track record or past experience with dealing with these type of large-scale solar facilities. October, the county approved, or the commissioners approved, 616.67 acres in the county's jurisdiction for the Lick Creek Solar Facility off of Martin Luther King Old Town Farmer Road area. They stated that it would take anywhere from 18 months to 36 months to get the facility up and running. Mr. Delafield stated in the meeting that he thought this would be quicker, around a year, assuming, I guess, all approvals. I'll let them address that part of it. The conditional zoning aspect does give you the ability to, with agreement from the applicant, to place additional conditions, things like buffers or anything that's offered that you think might enhance or make a facility of this type better. As far as, I think we've discussed this, Duke Energy by 2025 has to have 8% of their total production in renewable energy source. It's one of the reasons that are generating the interest in solar energy in these large-scale facilities. And again, Duke is the client that this would be sold to, the electricity generated to be sold to. There were questions about decommissioning. I think the applicant has promoted some new information about decommissioning. We do know that at the last meeting, the same thing was stated, that the state of North Carolina by 2022 is supposed to have a statewide decommissioning plan for solar facilities. I've been on the internet, read some of the information. I guess they're meeting. The pandemic has slowed a lot of things down as far as their progress. I don't know. Don't know where they're at currently on it. But decommissioning is a part of the necessary requirement. The state wants to address that, and from what I understand, it would be retroactive to any facility already approved. Now, how that would work, I have no clue. In this case, there are a lot of unanswered questions as far as what the future may hold for this. But if approved, we had some conditions that were placed on at the last hearing and the approval, and I would recommend, at the minimum, to stick with the same basic conditions. It required a minimum of a 50-foot landscape buffer. The applicant, I think, is choosing to do some more in certain areas. Again, I will let them speak to that. That would be the minimum setback off the property line for any facility or any portion of the facility at that point, the structures on the facility. The fencing not necessarily would be that. We'd be looking at the panels themselves. And from the county's perspective, if approved, the planning staff would recommend the applicant developer submit a final site plan showing a detailed layout of the facility, including the location of all solar panels, associated equipment, including access points, interior service roads, setbacks, and vegetative buffers existing and planted. The county would also recommend that all setbacks for the facility adhere to the front yard setback, which is in the M1 light manufacturing district, which is the 50-foot I explained. The planning board, and I need to explain the vote, we had an issue, and it never had come up before. We had one member absent, and so we got a vote of 4-3 with one non-excused abstention. And when we checked the next morning, it did pass. It was recommended 4-3. Got up with Shannon. I talked to Ty later that afternoon, but I'd already had to send the agenda out because I had to get a quick turnaround. And Ty stated that based on your rules that the board adopted, that any non-excused abstention to vote is considered an affirmative vote. So I need to record it. It was 5-3 to approve recommending the rezoning request by Bear Creek Solar. The planning board did, and their bylaws do cover what they cover is a tie vote, but they had nothing in the bylaws to state it. So Shannon and I have been looking at a lot of how voting takes place and stuff in the last couple of days, but just an odd situation that I'm going to address with the planning board so that doesn't happen again. The gentleman should have voted, but we'll take care of that at the next planning board meeting.
All right. Any questions or comments from the board?
David, you was talking about the same conditions setback. What was that?
50 foot.
50?
50 foot from all, because you don't have a traditional setback. In all districts, you have a front, side, and rear. This is no real traditional setback because we're talking multiple small structures in it. So 50 foot is a buffer. That was what, at a minimum, that's what I would recommend. I think the applicant, based on things I've reading in some of the site plan, and terrain features also have that they can be adjusted. They seem to propose to have adjusted some setbacks based on some comments received at the planning board meeting. Like I said, that's the applicant's prerogative to listen to what is said and then make adjustments to their plan. But as long as we've had to deal with this, we had such a quick turnaround. We usually don't have a meeting on Thursday. I usually have a week in between to get all the information to provide to you, but I had to get it done just slightly after lunch on Friday. So, and the applicant was making changes to the plan which we received today. And you can take time to read over them, and the applicant asked the questions about the adjustments to the site plan. And like I said, if you have any other questions for me, be glad to try to answer anything I can.
Question, please. David, I've noticed on some applications, we have a list of questions from the public meeting, but I can't find it for this request. Have I looked over it? I probably have.
Should be on attachment H.
I got an attachment H.
It shows you who the surrounding property owners were and the public information meeting. Did you not get an attachment H, Jimmy?
Yes, sir, I did. I remember seeing attachment H.
It's
right
just,
here.
it's the Bear Branch Solar Public Information Meeting Summary. It's not a long one. They held it at the Walnut Cove Library. They didn't have a large crowd. I think Rick was there. But you can talk to the applicant about, because that's the thing that I require, the ordinance requires it, but I stay out of it. That's the applicant's meeting to determine if they want to pursue on with a formal application. We just require it, and I take the typewritten minutes and the attendance, and make sure that they had, sent out the mailings to it. But other than that, I don't have any part of that meeting.
So you do not have a list of questions that happened at that meeting?
It does say right here, also discussed. Again, the applicant would be there. Some, you're right, Jimmy, some put down exactly what was stated. There is no specific requirement for it. It is, I tell each applicant, I said that it's required that you have typewritten minutes. And you state what goes on in the meeting, and then, of course, it's like, there's no format to do that. It is a public information meeting, and again, more questions are generated. But the applicant's here to answer those questions, and again, we got some people in attendance, I think, in the audience that were actually at the meeting that could better tell you. Like I said, we're not involved in that part of it.
Thank you.
More questions, comments on this?
I have some for David later, but not now.
Okay.
All right.
If y'all want to, I'll go ahead and do your presentation now.
Thank you, Chairman Nicholson, members of the board. I'm Tom Terrell with the law firm Fox Rothschild. I'm here tonight representing Renewable Energy Services. It's a family-owned North Carolina company that is one of the oldest of the solar developers in North Carolina. And they were a company, and they are a company that has been earning a reputation, community by community, of fair dealing with all their neighbors, collaboration with communities. I think Mr. Sutters would tell you they are very responsive to questions and comments, and they're going to show you tonight that they listen very closely to neighbors and to planning board members. And that's how they operate. I'm going to give you a very big picture overview and turn it over to Tom Delafield of Renewable Energy. As a short introductory summary, for those of you who are not familiar with solar, a solar farm is nothing but a series of panels that sits in a field. and passively receives sunlight and converts that sunlight into renewable energy. That's all it is. It is technology that's as old as I am, but it's only recently that that technology has been able to be used profitably and economically on a larger scale. Over 99% of the materials are nothing but glass, steel, and standard wiring. On the question of impact to the community, it's one of the lowest impact uses that we have. Far less impact than a standard subdivision. You cannot hear a solar farm, unlike a subdivision that has lawn mowers and leaf blowers. It does not generate traffic, unlike a subdivision. You cannot smell them. They are dark at night. There are no toxic or harmful emissions. There has never been, that I have ever seen, a study that shows that a solar farm has negative impact on adjoining properties. And the reason for that is that solar farms have none of the characteristics of those uses that have been found to have negative impacts. They must meet all state building code. They must meet all erosion and permit control requirements. They must meet all electric code requirements. They have to meet many other governmental codes and regulations, in addition to which they have to follow all of their own self-imposed regulations, which are in your book that we're going to hand out here. In fact, hand those out to the board. We're going to walk through this with you in just a second. They have to go through regulation at the North Carolina Utility Commission. They have to get permits from NCDOT and all of that. The tax increase to this county is going to be exorbitant when you compare it to what's currently coming to the county from these exact same acres. In addition to that, solar farms are not consumers of governmental services. All a solar farm does is to help you pay for services that you have to find the funds for to cover other people's services. Not 1 acre of the agricultural portion of this property is going to be lost. You won't be able to see it from Tuttle Road. If you ever drive down Tuttle Road, you're going to have 500 feet of natural vegetative buffer between you and the first panel that's out there. It is the thickest vegetative buffer from the roadway I have ever seen in the 8 years of representing companies doing solar farms. The project represents an applicant coming to you asking to invest $35 million of improvement in your county. This applicant has also agreed, and they've put this in writing, that they will coordinate with Will Corder at the Economic Development Office to make sure that as many local businesses, local service providers, local vendors, and local job applicants have more than an equal chance to compete for the many contracts and jobs that will be involved in the construction of this farm. My friend Adam Stewart was sitting here earlier. I think he has left. Adam Stewart has at least one company, maybe two. He and I have already spoken today, in fact. Adam can bid on these jobs. Adam has companies that can help clear. He's got a company that can do the grading. He's already working on solar farms. And when somebody local like Adam Stewart gets one of these contracts, he hires local people. He hires folks to do his repair to equipment who are local. He buys his fuel locally. And all of those employees and people who work for him spend their money in the community just like every other person locally who gets a contract or who was hired to work here. When that money is then respent in the community, it's called a multiplier effect. I've been in many, many zoning and land use cases over the last 35 years. That's all I do. In the broader context, this has not been a controversial case. We have had a couple of neighbors who have had questions and some concerns from the beginning, but I would describe that as in some general and even rational anxiety related to something that is new and different to them that they've never experienced. But our dialogues have at all times been cordial, and I think that the company I represent has been extremely responsive with information to them and even making site plan and other changes in response to their concerns. Please don't forget the property owner. The property owner whose family has owned and been paying taxes on this land for over 200 years, in fact, almost 235 years, has some rights here. And she is trying to exercise her property rights in a responsible and thoughtful manner that benefits everybody concerned, including the county. Some of our presentation this evening is going to be a standard presentation, but some of it is going to be new information that is responsive to what we heard last week at the Planning Board. Several questions and concerns were raised there, and the applicant listening came prepared to respond. Some of those new conditions and materials are going to be woven into the presentation by Tom Delafield, who will follow me in a moment. Very briefly, one of those concerns that was presented by the Planning Board was the purchase of the panels from a Chinese company. And if I could hear correctly from back where I sat, that was why one of the board members chose to abstain, because he said he didn't want anything bought from China. That company, Hanwha, that's listed in the staff report, the company that is the most likely source of these panels is from South Korea. It is not Chinese. It is a South Korean company, and I think all of you know that South Korea is a wonderful ally of the United States of America. Another question related to the end of life of a solar facility is called decommissioning. We're going to address that in some details in a minute. Ms. Bullins addressed decommissioning a little bit when she spoke during public comment, and she had a lot of questions, but not knowing the answers to questions does not mean that the answers are not there. I ask you to keep decommissioning at end of life in a proper context. And if you think about it, there is not a single home, there is not a single shopping center, there is not a single fast food restaurant, there is not a single convenience store, there's not a single factory, not a single barn, not a single doctor's office in this county that has a decommission plan. None of them. No buildings that you approve through the building code or through zoning that come here do you require to have a decommissioning plan. But this facility will have a decommissioning plan. So let's keep that in mind. Now, she asked about recycling, what will happen. There's a lot of money in the recycling of these component parts, and they all are recycled. Another vague concern that came up at the planning board was that some of the planning board members just had not seen a solar farm. In fact, that was what they said, that they had hesitations because they just hadn't seen one. And they were hesitant to vote yes on that basis. I'm going to show you some quotes. We reached out to some people with some experience in solar across North Carolina. I can give you the email and the phone number of every single one of these people to verify if you need to. Chris Sandifer is a member of the Nash County Planning Board. I know Mr. Sandifer from solar farms down there and some other contacts, but he says we've approved 37 solar farms in Nash County, many of them 50 megawatts and larger. This is a 35 megawatt. Many of them 50 megawatts and larger, and so far all we do is collect taxes on them. If there's a downside, we haven't figured it out yet. It's nothing but a win-win. Roger Davis, planning board member in the town of Calypso, population 438. It's in Duplin County. Our first thoughts about solar were hell no, but we decided to listen, and now one is up and running and nobody has a problem with it. People don't even realize it's there, and another one we approved was started just 2 weeks ago. Ira Howell, retired farmer in Cabarrus County. This is his income. It's hard to make money from farming. I know that. My dad is 93 and he farms, and I can tell you right now, that's the quickest way to become poor. So I leased 52 acres to Strata for a solar farm. The county was getting about $200 before, and it gets about $6,800 now. Who can argue with that? Now Duke wants to 70 acres next to it. The rent pays me a lot more than what I got for corn and soybeans. Just a couple more. Don Truel. Don is the Davidson County Commissioner. Some of you might know him. In Davidson County, we've had good experiences with solar farms, even including the extra large ones. Once they're built, the neighbors realize they much rather have a quiet solar farm than a subdivision next door. Our agricultural economy hasn't been hurt, and we have got one of the massive solar farms here in Davidson County. It has not caused any problems that I'm aware of. There are several more farm sites already approved and in process here in our county. From Greg Elkins, County Planning Director in Bladen County. This is the last one. In Bladen County, we have approximately 15 solar farms. Some of those, by the way, are the massive solar farms. Those aren't the small facilities, ranging in size. Over the years of operation, we have had good experience with these facilities. They have not caused any adverse issues that I'm aware of, and they have provided an increase to our tax base. I'm going to ask Mr. Tom Delafield to come up here in a minute, but before I do, I just want to take 2 minutes to walk you through these materials in case you want to refer back to them. On the second tab, there's the letter that was sent to adjoining owners. This is the best primer I've ever read about what solar is. It's very simple. It's in a Q&A form, and if you have a question and it's new to you, this letter to neighbors probably has the answer to it. There's the letter to you that you've already received from the property owner, followed by the statement that she's going to read to you later tonight. We have 3 new area site plans that we're providing you. These are new and updated from what the planning board got because we've added some buffer to this. The next tab shows you the buffer that's been added along the side where Ms. Bullins is, all along the western side. We have some photos at the next tab to illustrate how thick some of that vegetation is. The tab after that is some tax comparisons where we're showing you visually what this county will receive from a solar farm versus what you currently are getting. Those lines are so skinny at the bottom as to what you currently are getting and will be getting over time from this same acres. This is what Mr. Sandifer was talking about, which says if there's a downside, we can't figure it out. If you have questions about health and safety, there's a paper from North Carolina State University that's here in the notebook. We have a market impact study by Mr. Kirkland. Mr. Kirkland's here tonight. He has been described by people other than me as the country's foremost authority on the impact of solar farms on adjoining property, and he'll explain to you. He says, you can't get a facility like this if you can't hear it, see it, smell it, doesn't have any traffic generated. You can't get the data to show it harms property values nearby. There's a paper next to it if you have questions about how you balance solar with agriculture. This is a very good paper. Once again, this is coming out of North Carolina State. We have, after that, a letter to Mr. Sutter from Ms. Camerite that talks about the status with the North Carolina Utility Commission. It is not yet approved, but what Ms. Camerite says, we are expecting the Utility Commission will grant the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity very soon. And what she says in the body of the letter is that there were just it was published in the paper, there were no negative comments from the public. And it is, it has already met the qualifications for that certificate. I'm going to ask Mr. Delafield, he will show you that what's in the next tab, but this is an engineer's assessment of how much those components of a solar farm are worth at the time of decommissioning. Now, this is a present value determination, but it does have an engineer seal. The names have been blocked out. But what it illustrates is that at the time of decommissioning, there's money there. You can't abandon this because steel can be recycled, glass can be recycled, et cetera. Mr. Stokes mentioned House Bill 329. We attached that here at the next tab. House Bill 329, it was passed last summer by the General Assembly. You will see at the end that it has Speaker Tim Moore, and instead of Phil Berger's got Ralph Heiss's signature here on the back. All they do in this bill is to assign this issue of decommissioning to the North Carolina Environmental Management Commission that's coming up with standards. Mr. Sutter has already said that those standards will be retroactive to farms. If that is correct, then you know that the state will have standards that will apply to this farm. If it turns out not to be the case, actually I think it will be the case, but if it turns out not, we are presenting you with a decommissioning plan that's not only better than the one that was approved with the Lick Creek Solar, but as far as decommissioning plans go, it is an outstanding plan. And then the last thing about proposed conditions, we have put all of these new conditions about decommissioning, working with your economic development office, vegetative buffer increases in the setbacks, and about maintenance. Those came up at the planning board. We have made those into binding conditions that we ask you to impose on this project. I'm glad to answer questions, but if you don't have them, I can turn this over to Mr. Tom Delafield for some presentations about other issues in this matter.
Any question,
I
comments?
have one quick question. On this chart with the taxes,
Yes.
is that saying we get a cumulative amount of $1,080,000 over 40 years?
No, that is not. I think Tom will explain that. Would you like to explain that? You want to explain?
That is correct.
Oh, no, it's a million over.
I believe so.
Oh, okay. But it's, I have to,
If so, I have the same chartsmanship issue I had last time you guys presented to us.
the important thing is that it shows what the comparison is.
Yeah,
If it's just a timber.
yes, maybe your definition, it's 1,000% increase, which equals, what, $27,000 a year over 40 years? Or did I?
Yeah, there's a comparison, and it does incorporate appreciation over the lifetime of the project using the Stokes County tax code.
Okay. So it's $1,080,000 for 40 years.
Yes, sir.
Lump sum, okay. Got it, that's all I have.
Okay.
Mr. Walker, Ms. Wayne?
Mr. Chairman, I have some questions, and I don't know when would be the best time to ask them. It might be better to wait and see more information and then see how many are answered during that process.
I think we'll have a lot of information that would answer those. After Mr. Delafield speaks, we have Mr. Kirkland, who's here, who's going to present his study on property values, and also the property owner will be speaking. But I think Mr. Delafield will probably answer a lot of your questions.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
That's all I'm trying to make it look like it's a big giant increase. $1 million over 40 years. We say $40 a year. 27 more we're getting now, but it ain't a lot of money. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Good evening, board members.
Hope you're doing well tonight. Thank you for having us. Tom referenced we're one of the oldest companies in the state, and we may not look it, but we've been doing it our whole lives, and there's another generation behind us who couldn't be here for health reasons tonight. I'm going to start with the general description of the facility, talk a little bit about some of the development that we've done to date, some of the permitting required for solar farms like this, the utility approval impacts, dive a little bit deeper into the tax base benefits for the county, what the operations and maintenance look like for such a solar farm, and the decommissioning at the end of life. Jumping into the general description, we originated this project with the Paleys in July of 2019 and have been developing it with them since. To give you a sense of scale of this project, it is a 500-acre project and approximately an 800-acre tract. That 800 acres is based on a Google Earth measurement. I know it's listed in the county records as 744 acres. That parcel is primarily used as a timber farm today with 15 to 20-year-old mature pines and about 100 acres of agricultural land. Today, we are committing to not utilizing any of the agricultural land, and the entire footprint of the solar farm will sit within that timber farm. The project is 35 megawatts AC, enough capacity to power over 4,000 homes, and it's located off a total road approximately 3.5 miles as the crow flies from Walnut Cove. Mr. Suter mentioned some of the equipment that we will be using. I mentioned the hand wall panels, though we have not purchased any panels that include or equivalent there. We are committed to using Tier 1 bifacial panels. So a bifacial panel is a panel that absorbs energy both from the front and from the rear on the sort of bounce of energy off of the ground. And Tier 1 means that have been, I guess, vetted by a third party and meets qualifications for production volumes, capitalization, and liquidity requirements, and has been in business for at least 5 years. The purpose of the certification is to give the market and folks like yourself confidence that the manufacturers who stand behind these panels and their warranties will stand the test of time and will be there if there's ever anything to go wrong with the panels. The racking that will hold the panels is single axis tracking, meaning that it starts the panels facing east as the sun rises, and as it progresses over the sky, the panels track it and end in the west before resetting for the next day. Both of these pieces of technology are best in class in the industry and are designed to increase the efficiency of the solar system. The ground cover underneath the solar farm will remain grass. It's done that way to minimize the impact. This is not a situation where we're going to go out and pave 500 acres or anything like that. It will remain permeable and will again be covered with natural grasses. By state regulation, as Tom mentioned, there is 6 feet of security fencing surrounding the site with 3 strings of barbed wire. Projects of this size typically are built in 9 to 12 months. So we believe that we're about a year away currently from construction. So that will place the solar farm being operational in approximately 2 years. The solar farms are typically built in steps, and each step brings a different crew to the construction site. So that's anything from earth movers to electricians, but in total there will be hundreds of folks in and around the community eating lunch, grabbing a coffee, buying a spare part, and otherwise supporting local business as a result of this project. Tom mentioned it in his presentation as well, but we're excited to be working with Will Carter, the EDC, to make sure that as many local businesses have the opportunity to participate and partner with us in this project. Solar farms of this size, and specifically this one, have an estimated usable life of 35 to 40 years. That 40-year usable life begins with a 20-year contract with Duke Energy, who guarantees the purchase of the power that we produce. Following that 20-year contract, there are shorter, more transactional extensions with Duke Energy, but throughout the life cycle of the project, it will be comprehensively insured. The most notable characteristic of this project is how significant its undisturbed vegetative buffers are on all sides. There's over 500 feet of undisturbed vegetative buffer from the public right-of-way Tuttle Road, and 75 feet of undisturbed vegetative setback join the properties along the western boundary. You have the Dan River and its floodplain in the rear. Again, we will not be building in the floodplain. And the Paleys will retain some acreage to the east, which they will continue to farm for trees and perhaps build a retirement home there. These setbacks go far above and beyond both the county ordinances and staff recommendations. We are 150% of the staff's recommendation on the western boundary and more than 10 times its recommendation on the front. There will be no lights on this facility, so it really will be invisible, inaudible, and unsmellable. Beyond perhaps a monthly maintenance vehicle visit, you will literally never know that it's there. The site was originally designed and submitted differently, but since then we have solicited and listened to feedback and adjusted our plans accordingly from neighbors and from the planning board. At this time, I would like to show some photos illustrating what that boundary looks like. Following some feedback from the planning board on Thursday evening, some folks were having a difficult time visualizing exactly what the layout of the farm would look like from property boundary to the beginning of panels. So we were able to get our engineers to put together a sketch drawing showing each of the steps, and hopefully you find it helpful. So along the western boundary there, just if you wouldn't mind, I'll stand right beside it. This here is the property boundary. It runs, has kind of a jut out here, and is probably the closest to some of the homes right here. So I would fix this location. This area is the 75-foot of undisturbed vegetative buffer. Inside it is at least 100 feet of shade setback. So obviously with solar panels, you don't want to put the panels too close to the trees, or it could affect the efficiency, and they won't produce quite as much energy. So outside of the 75 feet, there's about 100 feet that will separate the tree line from the fence line. Inside this setback, if you will, we'll include any necessary retention ponds or anything like that. Following the shade buffer, there's 5 feet allotted for the security fencing. There's 20 feet allotted for a security road, and an additional 5 feet from the security road before the panels start. So in total, from the property boundary to the beginning of the panel is 205 feet at the very least. And over, let's call it, 125 feet from the end of the vegetative buffer. This is essentially the same drawing, but done with an aerial photography overlay, just showing how wooded this western boundary is. So I don't need to spend a whole lot of time here, but I guess it's important to note these residences here. This one is at least 1,100 feet from its nearest panel. Moving away from the engineering sketch, this is a picture of the vegetation at what will be the entrance to the solar farm. It's an existing logging road today, and as you can see, as soon as the road takes a turn to the left, it pretty much disappears behind the trees. We plan to improve this road and utilize it for access to the site, so it may be widened a little bit, but our intent is to maintain this aesthetic and this much view shed moving forward. This is an identical slide to the one just shown, with the exception of the green arrow at the bottom. It's meant to provide reference for the following two photos to give you an idea of what the boundary looks like when in those trees. This is a look at the creek in between the property boundary. As you can see, this is a pretty significant water feature, and one that by state regulations will likely never be constructed in. As you can see, it's filled with primarily hardwoods that stay leafy probably 9 months of the year. And again, there is a significant topographical dip here in between the two properties. The second photo is taken from essentially the same location, but looking back into the property, into the Paley property. The gentleman in the background is 50 feet. And so you can imagine that the trees there are pretty heavily wooded, and another 25 feet behind him of undisturbed vegetation is going to be very difficult to see through. And then once you get to that 75 feet of undisturbed vegetation, you will have another 125 feet before the panels start, and at least 100 feet before any fence. Moving beyond the general description of the facility and on to some of our development to date. As Tom mentioned and David mentioned, we hosted a public information meeting on February 25th at the Walnut Cove Public Library. Inviting people to it. We sent letters far and wide to more folks than the county requires. and had one nearby landowner and his wife attend. A total of 4 folks attended, one of them Mr. Morris here this evening, and another planning official from Walnut Cove to round out the 4. In addition, we had one neighbor, out-of-town neighbor from Cary, who called after receiving the letter and was curious, but throughout the county planning and community outreach process, we received no opposition. As far as the permits that are required for this solar farm, solar farms are permitted at a variety of levels, from the federal level down to the state and to the county level, all prior to construction. At the federal level, we're approved by the Federal Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the FAA. At the state level, this is where the majority of the regulation takes place, and it's primarily done under the jurisdiction of the North Carolina Utilities Commission, as you can imagine it being an energy facility. The Utilities Commission primary permit is a Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity. Our application to NCUC was submitted on February 24th. As a part of that project application, we published notice of the project in the Stokes News beginning on the 19th and progressing into April. To see those exact dates, I would direct you to Ms. Cameron's letter in that binder. The purpose of the CPCN process is in part to give both the public and state regulators the opportunity to comment on the project. The public offered no comments to the Utilities Commission, and again, we've received no opposition through this process, though published in the Stokes News. The process is moving smoothly, and we hope to have that final approval in place in the next 20 to 30 days. Some of the concurrence letters that have come as the process is ongoing, and they do not all come at once, have been offered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the North Carolina Wildlife Commission. They both have offered letters of no objection to the project as planned. In addition to the Utilities Commission, the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality offers somewhat significant permits for these projects, and they have oversight on stormwater and erosion control. They seek to ensure that we manage all the stormwater that comes onto our site and ensure that we manage it properly. As a business practice, we try to minimize the grading on the site because as a cost measure, you can understand how grading 500 acres would get expensive quite quickly. So we try to utilize as much of the existing topography as we can in putting together our water mitigation techniques. Again, just in summary there, the purpose of those permits from DEQ is to ensure that there is no runoff or erosion onto adjoining properties, existing streams, or in this case, the Dan River. At the county level, all building and electrical plans are reviewed before the issuance of building permits. The plans are put together by licensed engineers in the state of North Carolina. This process is identical to the construction of any other building, residential or commercial. Every step of the way, respected licensed engineers are providing calculations and providing the drawings with stamps and so on. With over $30 million to be invested here, we are heavily incentivized to build this thing the right way. And over the last 10 years in North Carolina, we've seen every form of severe weather, from hurricanes to tornadoes to flooding, and no solar farms have been torn apart or otherwise put out of commission. In addition to the regulatory approval, the project will also be subject to approval by our favorite utility, Duke Energy. North Carolina, at the request of Duke Energy, has focused the approval of solar on an annual RFP with the goal of integrating solar into the grid at the cheapest cost to the consumer and the lowest cost energy in the market. If everything goes to plan with the RFP like we believe that it will, we will begin construction in approximately 1 year. It's worth noting here that without a long-term contract with Duke Energy, this facility will not be constructed. It is only with that financial assurance that we have the confidence to ensure or to invest such a large amount here. County impact and the tax base increase, if I could grab this visual aid here. Mr. Morris had some questions on it. So you can see in year one, the solar farm produces an estimated $58,000 in tax revenue. Currently, the property produces approximately $2,300. This is a 2,445% increase over its current use, which is quite significant. And as you can see, the blue doesn't necessarily measure there. Over time, the blue remains pretty much a constant of the $2,300, simply multiplied by the amount of years that the solar farm is in use. And as the tax numbers remain significant, they decrease as a result of the depreciation schedules that are set forth in the Stokes County Tax Code as the project ages. But in year one, again, $58,000 from the solar farm compared to $2,300 from the current agricultural use. And in year 40, over $1 million compared to approximately $90,000 from the existing use. So very considerable delta there.
I have another question on that, if you would.
Sure.
So I just want to double check my math. $1,080,000, that is the total cumulative amount for 40 years.
40, yes, sir.
You divide that by 40, you get $27,000 a year average, right? Is that true?
I trust your math, yes, sir.
Okay. Just curious.
So again, as the system ages, with taking into account the depreciation, it's not as valuable in year 40 as it is in year
Well, the
1.
chart shows all that growth and everything, but realistically, when you're looking at an economic development project, $27,000 average per year is not a lot of money compared to other things.
Compared to $2,300, we feel that it is.
Yes, more than 2,300, but it's not like a manufacturing facility that multiplies 15 times what you get compared to something like this.
Yeah, that's correct.
$27,000 average per year.
Sir, I mean, yeah, I think from Mr. Sudor's comments at the beginning, we don't feel, or he doesn't feel that there is really much opportunity for a factory in this location given the utilities available. So to us, this and the landowner feels like the highest and best use.
Yeah, there we get into our crystal ball thing, though, looked into the future. I didn't think SpaceX would be shooting a Falcon 9
And
a few
landing
years ago and
Yeah.
landing boosters on ships either, but lots of things can change with land. We could have some technological development that completely changed how sewer's done. All of a sudden, something that can't do sewer could do sewer easily. I mean, if you can do SpaceX, you might be able to figure out something on the sewer. So I'm not picking at you. I just don't like to make these global assumptions of the future that we really can't really see what's going to be going on 40 to 30 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, what we can do is project what this farm would produce, and that's
Yeah,
what we've
that's
done
true.
today, and tried to give you an idea of what it will produce, and this is our best estimate given the mill rates that are available and the depreciation.
Well, I don't
schedules.
disagree with your numbers at all. I mean, I trust what you're saying there.
Okay. Any other questions on this graphic?
See that one more time, I got mine folded up here. Now, year one, could you help me with the 58,000? Commissioner Morris is saying 27,000 a year. And what does the 58,000 represent in your chart?
That represents the year one taxation, so it is somewhat front-loaded in terms of how much the county will yield from it. As the property tax is based on the appraised value of the system, and as the system ages, it will be depreciated, and so therefore the property tax derived from the project in year 40 will be based on the appraisal of a system at a lower value than it was in year one.
That's how he gets the average of 27,000, because in your later years, it's less considerably than it was in the early years.
Yes, that's correct, sir.
I'm with you now.
Well, the reason charts like that, and I've done it myself to a certain extent, so I'm not nitpicking, but when you go out and tell the community, we're going to have a 2,445% increase in taxes the first year. They'll say, wow, that's a big number. 2,445%. Well, it equals $58,000. So, you know what I'm saying, right?
I do, yeah. I mean, again, the land is currently in agricultural tax deferment, so the $58,000, I
The
believe also.
percentages really don't
yeah.
mean much. The real numbers you've got on there do, but the percentages they can very easily
Manipulated.
a little bit of a false impression.
One more question regarding taxes. You mentioned the depreciation scale. I don't think that's, has any flexibility built into it. That's state regulated and fixed, I believe.
I believe it's county regulated, but I'm not sure about
I
that.
think we have our previous tax administrator as our county manager now, and I think you remember how that depreciation scale works on machinery. Now, did you get some guidelines from the state and we have to adhere to those?
Commissioners adopt what the state puts out on business personal property, and I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, personal property.
Yes,
You also got to remember that 80% of this value is exempt by the federal and state government, so there's no taxes on that 80%.
that is considered when putting together these numbers.
Only 20% of the personal property value that you're going to collect any revenue on,
Right, and then that depreciates over time also.
and that will depreciate over the years.
And still, the numbers look enough to get my attention to some extent.
But some of this value is bound to be based on the real estate, the land coming off of the deferment and being assessed at market value of what the county would have on it for usable residential property. It may go to $500 or $600 an acre per tax rate, where it is assessed at a deferment of $400 and some dollars an acre. So some of that's got in it, but we would still allow the farming land, what's not under these panels, to still remain on the deferment side of it.
And I don't believe that this graphic considers those taxes that will come from the residual land not used for the solar farm. And I do believe that year one considers the rollback taxes as the land is removed from agricultural tax deferment. And also, as I understand the Paley's intentions for the land, they will keep it in that agricultural tax deferment indefinitely without a higher and better use to use for it.
Thank you.
Just a quick question while we're talking about taxes, property taxes and all. I can't remember from our last one we'd sit and talked about, does this devalue the property owners around it? Does it make their property value go down any? Will be
It
right
does
beside a
not.
solar field?
Mr. Kirkland is here this evening. He'll be presenting right after me, and he can address those concerns in full.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
I got one question.
Mr. Langford.
Yes, sir.
Did you say this was a $30 million investment?
Yes, sir. 35. As far as how much of the county's land we will utilize, doing the calculations of 500 acres into 291,000 acres, this will not even be 0.2%. Moving on to the operations and maintenance of this facility, we did not touch on it on the top, but I think it's important to mention here that the long-term owner and operator of this facility will be Capital Power. Capital Power is a Canadian company. They are publicly traded on the Canadian Stock Exchange. They operate facilities of all kinds in the United States, gas, wind, and solar. And in the United States, they own over 1,800 megawatts of power generating capacity. In North Carolina, they own 3 facilities, including the Roxborough plant not far from here, as well as another gas plant out east and another solar farm. They've had a great experience thus far and intend to continue to invest here. And as we've seen through their actions thus far, they are a good partner to the community, investing in the communities in which they operate. So I'm just going to hit the high points on the operations and maintenance plan. Feel free to ask questions about it at the end. Having leaned on Capital Power's experience in putting this together on a daily basis, the solar farm is very passive and doesn't require any management on site, though it is monitored on a 24/7 basis remotely to ensure that it's operating properly and safely. On a monthly basis, the primary maintenance required is really just mowing the inside of the facility to ensure that the grass does not get so high as to shade the panels. And on a yearly basis, we do inspections to different aspects of the facility to ensure that the equipment and electrical connections are safe and up to code. As Tom mentioned, and as you'll see in the back of the book, one condition that we would like to impose on ourselves is to keep an updated sign on the gate providing contact information for the person or company responsible for the operations and maintenance of the solar farm. So if there is ever an issue that's noticed, it will not be difficult to contact the right person. Last but certainly not least, the decommissioning roles and responsibilities for what happens to the facility at the end of its life. The tenant, in short, Bear Branch Solar, is responsible. We have coordinated and agreed with the landowner that at the end of the facility's useful life, there will be a bond or other form of security and to the benefit of the landowner in place to cover the cost of decommissioning to ensure that there is no cost to the landowners or to the county. That security will be put in place 1 year prior to the end of term and will be 110% of the decommissioning cost less the resale or salvage value of the components. That decommissioning cost estimate will be put together by a North Carolina licensed engineer. At this time, I would like to refer you to the decommissioning section in your binder. We have provided here this evening a sample decommissioning plan that was put together for a solar farm for another facility in North Carolina. And though it's not exactly an apples-to-apples comparison, we thought that it does a good job of helping folks understand what goes into the decommissioning of a solar farm and what some of the economic drivers are that are a part of it. Moving past page 1, there's a statement of essentially what this is, followed by 2 very helpful pages that describe exactly how you decommission a solar farm. So if you might look to that page, at the top it says PV modules. You will hand remove, place modules face down on pallets, tape wire ends, tied down and transport via skid steer to staging location, assumed salvage value and 5% breakage. It progresses throughout the different components of the solar farm, discussing how you excavate the cable. Let's say how you take apart the racking posts with a post puller and how, again, you get these off the site so that at the end of the useful life of the solar farm, we will take it apart and restore it to a state similar to which it exists today. If you will proceed with me towards the tables in the back, this is again the numbers that were put forward for an additional solar farm. And if you're curious, however, the last page is a prorated version as it applies to Bear Branch Solar. So at the top, again, this is a repurposed estimate, but I think serves as a great educational tool. You look at the costs of the disassembly and disposal of the equipment there. So for instance, Mr. Sudorth mentioned how many panels there are. You can see PV modules at the top and how much it costs to remove it. Subtotal, how much it will cost to remove this facility, is $1.23 million. Moving down, the salvage value of the facility, you really get into some somewhat crazy numbers at the amount of pounds that are involved with this thing in terms of the recyclable metals. These solar farms are comprised of solar panels, copper conduiting, aluminum racking, steel I-beams, and standard chain link fencing. All of that material is a commodity metal which can be recycled. If you look at the salvage value here, you can see, for instance, the single axis racking frame, there are 5 million pounds of that on site. Assuming a discounted cost associated with that, it produces a salvage value there, and when totaling that up, the salvage value of the system in the field is $4.7 million. As you can see, when netting out those 2 numbers, the salvage value and the disassembly cost, there is a $3.4 million benefit to removing all this equipment and metal from the field. In the case that is not to happen, there is still the decommissioning bond in favor of the property owner, so that if this does not hold up to the test of time, there will be a third party who has that security in place that the landowner can call on if need be and see to the removal of it themselves. In addition, it's worth noting, talking about House Bill 329, when speaking with Speaker Moore and some of the other House leadership, they understand the importance of solar to rural counties in North Carolina, both out east and across the state. And they also understand the benefits that solar has provided over the years. So their effort in seeking to put together a decommissioning plan is to standardize that approach across the state to give both counties, landowners, and developers more clarity as to what the path forward will be. So what we have proposed and prepared today, we believe is more stringent and goes beyond what the state law seeks to or will impose. However, without those details coming forth yet, we can't say that definitively. That's simply our belief. So in closing, I would like to say that in all our years of developing solar in the Carolinas, we have never had a solar farm so invisible and have so little impact on neighbors as Bear Branch Solar. Thank you. At this time, if you wouldn't mind holding some of your questions until the end of the presentation, I'll invite Mr. Kirkland up here as he may answer some of those questions, and we'll proceed from there.
Thank you.
It's an interesting little chute you have us standing in. Good evening. My name's Rich Kirkland. I'm a state certified appraiser in North Carolina. I've been appraising for about 25 years in the state. I'm also an MAI through the Appraisal Institute. I've regularly appraised agricultural products and projects. I look at commercial agriculture. I look at residential subdivision development, commercial properties, things of that nature. I also do impact analysis on a wide range of different uses, but tonight I've been asked to look at and discuss solar farms. I've been looking at solar farms, specifically in North Carolina, but also in about 17 other states. I've been looking at these for about 9 years. I've looked at about 680 or so solar farms at this point, and I've really been compiling what are around solar farms, where are they located, how close do they get to adjoining properties, and also looking for sales next to solar farms so I can measure to see if there's been any impact on those property values, just to address your question. The methodology you use for looking at whether or not there's an impact is called a paired sales analysis or a matched pair analysis. This is a very standard appraisal tool that's used essentially in all appraisals. Whenever someone appraises your house and they compare and they look at other properties, they make those minor adjustments throughout it. Whether, this is just like your house, but this one has a garage. Well, there's an adjustment that comes in there, and that adjustment is derived from matched pairs, or at least it should be. Matched pairs is really just to address the differences between one property and another. And what you do is in the case of a solar farm, you would look for a sale next to a solar farm, and you'd compare a similar property as close to that as in time and space and other features, and look to see if there's anything that you would attribute to the solar farm. If you have two identical properties and the only difference is the solar farm, whatever's left over you would attribute to the solar farm. Again, this is the technique used by the banks. It's used by the IRS. This is accepted appraisal technique. It's put forward by the Appraisal Institute. It's taught in the textbooks put out by the Appraisal Institute, the Appraisal of Real Estate textbook. Dr. Randall Bell is a PhD and MAI. He wrote a book on specifically looking at real estate damages, a book called Real Estate Damages put out by the Appraisal Institute. He again outlines very step-by-step processes, and I've gone about following Dr. Bell's methodology. And that includes looking at different types of matched pair analysis, which also includes a sale and resale, where you look at a property that sold before a solar farm was built. You can look at it after a period of time. You can see after the solar farm was built and the house sells again, you can look at the appreciation and measure to see first, did it appreciate, but more importantly, did it appreciate at the same rate as other properties in the area? So I've looked at matched pairs like that as well. My conclusion after looking at that, and I know you've got a copy of the report up there, is that it's having no impact on property values. To get to that conclusion, I've looked at 17 solar farms in and around Stokes County. I've looked at specifically 14 solar farms in North Carolina, and from those I've pulled 38 sales and looked and did that match pair analysis. When you do that, you're looking at multiple sales to compare to that one that's next to the solar farm. You're trying to triangulate it on value just like you would when you appraise your house. So I've looked at over 150 sales in this study really to generate this opinion of no impact on property value. And like I said earlier, I've been doing this for a while now, and I've been working in a lot of other states. I've got a total of 89 different match pairs that I've pulled looking at all these other states as well. That puts me at over 350 sales points that I've been looking at to generate this study. So again, the data is showing no impact on property value. There's essentially, when you look at any appraisal, plus or minus 5% would be standard market sort of static. Real estate is, by its very nature, a little imprecise. You can have two identical homes built by the same builder in the same subdivision, and one's going to sell for a different price than the one right next door. So that plus or minus 5% is typical, and what I'm finding the aggregate of my data is showing is about a plus 2%, meaning about 2% higher than the comps I'm looking at. That doesn't mean there's an enhancement, it just means it's nothing. It's in that plus or minus 5% range. And this is not just my opinion. I've worked on this with, I know that there's been at least a dozen appraisers in North Carolina who've reviewed or worked with me on this project. And when you add in the other states, there's been dozens more MAIs who have looked at this and gone over this data. This data has gone, earlier versions of this study have gone through and have gone up to the North Carolina, some of the North Carolina court systems that have been approved as being significant and substantial information able to make the conclusion of no impact on property values. And so, and the reason that is that, like I said, I do a lot of impact analysis, and when you do find an impact, they typically fall in broad categories, sort of descending hierarchy. If there's going to be an impact to measure, the biggest impacts you find are where there's hazardous materials. After that, you come down, there's odor, then noise, traffic, and you come on down to the smallest category, which is appearance. And the only category that solar farms really trigger on that you would look at in characteristics would be that smallest category, which is down at appearance. And again, the solar farms are going to have a landscape buffer, they have significant setbacks, and that's true with the comps that I've looked at, where I've looked at matched pairs. They have larger setbacks than other uses that would traditionally be put on these places, and also they've got landscape screening to help buffer. And that's why you're not finding any impact on property values, because it is in that smallest category to be concerned about, and also it's easily mitigated through those methods. I'd be happy to go into greater detail or discuss any of the specific sales or matched pairs I looked at, but hopefully I've answered your question. And again, I guess they might want to have questions at the end, but however you guys prefer, I'll go with the flow.
Any questions for you, Commissioner Walker?
Kirkland, you're presenting some very interesting data, very interesting information. Let me ask you a semi-personal type question, if I may, please.
Sure.
Would you have any concerns, or what would your concerns be about living near a solar farm? If you were looking to buy a particular property and it happened to be near a solar farm, would you have concerns?
No, sir. No. I mean, I can speak to the house that I left. I moved about 5 years ago, and I left the house I was at before because I backed up to pasture. I had cows in my backyard, and we were forever chasing them back into there. You know, when the fence comes down, you got to shove them back over. And we loved that location, but we knew a subdivision was coming. And so ultimately, instead of having 20 homes in my backyard, we moved to another location that would maintain the privacy that we were really looking for. Solar farms do provide that type of privacy, and if a solar farm was pending to go out there, we would not have moved.
Thank you.
Commissioner Morris, you have something?
Nothing on this particular subject.
Commissioner Lane? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I'm going to introduce our next speaker, but Mr. Walker, you didn't ask me to address that last question, but I'm going to.
Thank you.
My wife and I spend half our time living partly on my family's farm. We got 753 acres. We got a huge herd of cattle. But my daddy, at 93, has spent the last 8 years trying to get a company to put a solar farm on our land, because that's one of the best ways, and I agree with him, that we can keep this land in the family when my parents are gone. And it would mean that my wife and I, when we're down there, are living next to a solar farm. We'd love to have a one this size, because we could accommodate it, and that would still leave us room. We have a lot of animals and other things, but it would enable us to keep it, and that's a big factor for us. But living next to that solar farm, I've seen them, I've touched them, I've been inside of them. There's really nothing, as I said before, it's nothing but glass on steel, and you can't hear. But thank you for the opportunity to volunteer. I want to introduce y'all to Mr. Tommy Cleveland. Mr. Cleveland has been the face of solar in North Carolina. Really, he comes out of North Carolina State University. He's one of the first and earliest public spokespeople for solar, what it is, what it's not. He's been a consultant to many cities and counties throughout this process as solar has been evolving in North Carolina. They've looked at Tommy. He's now a consultant to Duke Energy on a lot of their projects in solar. But he's here tonight. We didn't know if you had questions about whether they're safe. But Tommy has a short presentation for you that he can, I think, assure you that there's nothing about these that create a safety issue for anybody near this facility. Tommy, if you would.
Good evening, Board. As you heard, my name's Tommy Cleveland. I'm a licensed professional engineer in North Carolina. I have been for about 12 years and working in solar for 15 years, really before there was much of an industry. I was working at NC State University at that time at North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center. When I started there, it was called North Carolina Solar Center, and we changed names while I was there. And as solar started to get developed at this kind of utility scale across the state, a lot of communities and officials and neighbors of the first projects had a lot of questions about them. It was a new technology for the area, certainly at this scale. And a lot of those questions came to me at the university, and I knew some of the answers, but definitely not all of them, and started doing a lot of research on those questions about, what are the risks here, what happens after it sits in the field for 20 years, and developed a lot of expertise on those questions. And I was the lead author on that NC State paper that's in your packet. About when that paper came out, unrelated to when that paper came out though, I left the university and now I'm working for a consulting firm, and we do inspections for all the private solar farms connected to Duke Energy's distribution system. So I was out in the field all day today inspecting a site, and we give approval before Duke gives them power and then turns them on to start producing. And then in the evenings, I'm serving as a private consultant for questions and hearings kind of like this. As you can see in that report, my conclusions today are still the same as in that report, that there's not a negative health or safety risk from this technology implemented in this way, in this scale. And in fact, it's a very clean technology. It means the general area is burning less coal and natural gas, so there's less air and water pollution because this project's out there producing electricity. The main health and safety related concerns that we looked at in the report, and that was based on questions we had heard, as well as reading a lot of academic literature from around the U.S. as well as Europe and other places that goes back decades. The technology is not new. These same silicon-based panels, the same technology has been out in the field for over 40 years now. But 40 years ago, it was real expensive to make that one panel. And now industry's gotten a lot better, a lot more advanced in manufacturing, and the efficiencies are higher and the costs are way down. So now it makes sense to economically to build projects at this scale. And the things that we focus on were electromagnetic fields, or what you may call EMF or radiation, toxicity, and then end of life, kind of what happens at the decommissioning or end of the project. Just real quickly, EMF is not a health or safety concern. Most of the project doesn't produce any EMF in the DC part. All the panels, they're direct current electricity. The inverters, and then the higher voltage wires, leaving the inverters going above to the substation and then eventually above ground on poles. That electricity is no different than the electricity that's already running through the wires in this building and the components that the appliances we use every day, or the wires running down the street. So nobody will experience any increased EMF from the project. As far as toxicity, you've heard a little bit about what the panels are. The panels are manufactured almost entirely of glass, particularly these newer bifacial panels you heard of. It's a sheet of glass in the front and a sheet of glass in the back, where that, at least the front glass is tempered glass, and something like 90% of the weight of the panel is just glass. Almost the rest of the weight are some industrial adhesives, some encapsulants, and then silicon that makes up the solar cells. And then you've got just tiny little bits of metal to conduct the electricity away. The one component that has any concern from a health or safety point of view was both. There's a little silver in there. Technically, silver can be a toxic, and then there's some lead in some of the solder and the just electrical connections. But it's a small amount of lead. It's encapsulated away, so moisture doesn't get to it, and it's protected by this tempered glass that's front. And then at the end of life, when that panel is in use, there's no way at all for anything to come out of it. At the end of the life, those panels still have value as a working panel, assuming it's not broken, but they have a 25-year power warranty, this industry-wide, that says after 25 years, it'll still produce at least 80% of what it did on day one. So it's expected, it's likely a lot of the panels would still be sellable as a usable panel. If not, it can be recycled. Most of what's there is glass, which is very recyclable. And then as a last resort, assuming for whatever reason at that point in time, recyclability didn't work, it could be landfilled in a traditional landfill. So I could answer any questions, but my conclusion is that the project would not have any material health or safety impacts on the community.
I guess the one question I have, I'm not sure if you'd be the one to answer or not.
Yes, sir.
Ask somebody from the solar company. Addressing one of Ms. Bolson's concerns, we get to the solar panels are safe, but what about the pesticides or anything else that might be sprayed around to keep the weeds and stuff down?
Yeah, I've addressed that some. It's not quite my expertise, but it is a topic I've researched. And the company can speak what their plans are for this site, but I can say the industry in general primarily mows with use of some herbicides. Generally, they're directing that to woody weeds, trying to keep it in grass so that they're just mowing. But nobody in the industry is putting out herbicides across the entire acreage. It's always just portions of the site when they are using it, and it's less than, were it to be in agriculture, it's a lot less than used on row crops. But somebody from the site could tell you something more specific about this site.
Okay. Any more questions for him? Mr. Walker?
I don't have quite sure how to ask this question, but let me give it a try. You're talking about, and you seem credible, you've obviously have a lot of useful experience. What is your theory of how or why folks are intimidated by the thought of a solar farm coming to their area? Some people seem to be uncomfortable with that concept or with that idea. Do you have a theory about what's driving that?
Combination of factors. It's a new technology, something they're not used to living closely with, that looks different than trees or crops or buildings. And if they're worried about it and go look for reasons to be worried, I'll search online, why should I be worried? Then some people will tell you to be worried. I think it's a stacking of those factors, and it's different for everybody. They may have different personal reasons, but I think it's those are what I've seen has been most common concerns, or most common reasons for concern.
Once a solar farm is in place, do you have any way of tracking whether or not these fears are alleviated, or do some of them continue on?
On a community-wide basis, I think you can look at this stage of the development process at land use permitting, and in many jurisdictions, the first few projects receive a lot of resistance, but as those projects have been in and people are comfortable with them in that area, you see a lot less resistance, even when the projects are 10 times or more the size of the early projects. So So I think it's an indication of people becoming familiar with them and having less concerns.
I'll mention this, I am pro-green power. Exhaust gases going into our atmosphere and other things with the current generation methods are not so much with this approach. Matter of fact, it seems very clean. And I find comfort in that because you hear all this, and I don't know what's true nowadays or how much of what's true. But you hear all this talk about global warming and the risk that we're exposing ourselves to if this continues the way if things continue the way they seem to be going now. And I look at things like solar farms and wind power as offsetting some of that risk that we have for global warming. I know there's mixed opinions on that. Seems like about anything nowadays there's mixed opinions on. But I like the idea of solar farms, windmills, all of these relatively new technology for generating power. But I think and you may have kind of expressed some of this, I think we do have to deal with not in my backyard at times. Folks will generally agree that the concept is great, but why don't you take it somewhere else? And you know, no matter where it goes, how much variation is there in the level of resistance that you're aware of from location to location? Do you encounter more in some areas than others?
Yes, but it's even with how much visibility I have, it's hard to classify it in a way that I think scientifically you could put,
Hard to quantify.
hard to quantify and hard to have a lot of confidence in any conclusion I may have because I'm just seeing a little bit of data here and there. I haven't gone out and done a survey.
When I was attending a commissioners conference a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago it seems like, there was a presentation there on solar farms. I think NC State might have been involved in some ways in putting it together. And it seemed like at that time there were even more concerns than there appear to be now. So it seems like folks are getting more used to things like solar farms. And I liked what the gentleman said earlier about this may be, in some cases, about the only realistic way a family has of holding on to the family farm. And that's something I know a lot of people in our county would like to be able to do is hold on to family land. But I appreciate your information, and is there anything else that you can think of, kind of based on the questions I'm asking, that you can volunteer?
I guess I'd just like to reiterate that there's nothing to be afraid of, that it's a well understood technology. There's something around 400 projects, many of those somewhat smaller than this, but many larger than that as well, just around North Carolina. And as communities have gotten that experience of living close to those projects, the not in my backyard kind of sentiment has gone down rather than up as people get comfortable with them.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
After all the speakers are finished, I will, but not.
And could we at some point take a short?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna do it right now. Before you get back, we're just gonna take a short break real quick. I'll call the meeting back to order. You want to come on up and say what you're going to say here?
We do have two more speakers, but once again, I'm going to ask Mr. Walker if he'll allow me to address a question that he threw to Mr. Cleveland.
Please do.
Now, in 35 years, I have represented developers and property owners and families for just about every single kind of use you can imagine. And no matter what you do, when you notify people in a community that there's going to be a new use, some kind of change, people come out and oppose it. And it's not because, in most cases, there is something inherently bad about the use. Certainly, it doesn't apply here because you won't, as we keep saying, you won't be able to see it, hear it, smell it, you know it's there. But it's change. And there's always, as part of us as humans, we are fearful of change. People don't like change. People are fearful just naturally of the unknown. And all of that's interpreted negatively. And I understand it. I think we all have that in us, but it doesn't mean just because somebody is concerned, it doesn't mean the project is a bad project. So that's it. And then how do we know that are there communities where those fears have been alleviated? On some of the quotes that we had on that screen, Davidson County, the commissioner, Chris Sandifer, the planning board member in Nash County, you know, they've had it. The Bladen County planning director, they've had scads of these. They're huge ones in Davidson and Bladen. Davidson is a close by Piedmont County. Once it's in, once they're up and running, they don't have those negative feelings about it. And I'll tell you what else. When I go to communities where they already have solar and we have our experts, we don't know the particular board, they say, we've already heard this so many times, you don't even need to have these people come up. It says, let's just move this thing along. We've seen solar farms. Show us your site plan and let's just vote. And that has occurred on many occasions. Now, a little bit of exaggeration, but it's, you know, that shows you that a community that knows it is okay. We have two more people to speak. I've never met David McGee before. Mr. McGee farms this land. He will continue to farm this land if this solar farm is approved. He reached out and asked if he could speak about this. He knows the family, and I'm going to ask Mr. McGee if he would come up.
Absolutely. I know some of you guys, some of you I don't, but I'm David McGee. I live on Robertson Ridge Road. And I've known the Paleys for 6 years, and I farmed this land that long. More than that, I wouldn't speak to this if I wasn't somewhat familiar with them, but I am a licensed professional engineer and a contractor. Engineer in 5 states, contractor in 3. And actually have worked on design teams and built some of these facilities down in the eastern part of our state. And I've never seen one in all the planning and stuff that we did with as much effort as I've seen these guys put into this one to make it work. Man, we were fast. We were in and out. We put them in and got gone with not nearly the thought that what I've seen here tonight. I've been very impressed with their level of detail. My involvement with the Paleys has been, if they tell you they're going to do something, they're going to do it. For those of you that farm and know farmers, maintaining a farm lease is not always easy. Keeping landowners happy, but these guys, if they commit something to you, they're going to do it. I've enjoyed my relationship with them and hope to continue to do that. If they tell you they're going to do something with this farm, you can count on it. And as a resident and the neighbor farming the land, I can't see a lose in it. Maybe it's not the most revenue that we get from something in the county, but it's certainly more than the tree farm's going to get. And it's not going to bother anything. It's only going to help. So thank you, and I do appreciate the opportunity to at least come and see how this process works. I've never been here before. But thank you.
Thank you for coming and speaking.
I'm going to go eat, if that's okay. I got to go back to that farm in the morning and finish plowing my fire.
Thank you. Our country was founded on several bedrock principles. And one of those bedrock principles is the respect for private property. I encounter issues related to people trying to deny this all the time because in my career that I have dedicated my career to representing owners and people who want to make use of land of somebody's property. I will say, though, in 35 years, I have never, until this project, represented somebody whose family has owned the land for close to 235 years. And you have to earn some rights on that land in 235 years. I have never had this chance. They have paid the taxes from day one. Those taxes have supported this county. And all they're asking is that you allow them to make a safe, reasonable, good, positive use of their property that's respectful of others and certainly good for the county. I'd like to introduce Ms. Elizabeth Paley. She'll tell you more about who she is. Her statement is in your book if you want to follow it. Ms. Paley, would you come up?
Good evening, board members. My name is Elizabeth Paley. I'm a former North Carolina school teacher, and I now specialize in the treatment for children with autism and other special needs. And I'm here tonight with my husband, Darren. And like Mr. Tom just said, this land we're talking about has been in my family since Peter Harston landed in this community in 1785, which was before the Constitution was even signed. And my ancestors who farmed this land have fought in just about every war that's defined who we are as Americans. I've personally owned this land since I was 18. I inherited it from my grandfather, Samuel Wilson. My mother, his daughter, died when I was 5, so therefore I directly inherited the land from my grandfather. My great-grandfather, Samuel Harston Wilson, acquired his share of the land in the early 1900s when our family members were dividing up parts of Saratown. And my grandfather felt very deeply about family members maintaining, sorry, I get emotional. Maintaining the land that they own. And he passed that sentiment on to me. Thank you. And my brother and my sister. And that sentiment's further compounded by the fact that this land represents my mother to me and our lineage. And I watched as I grew up, my grandfather worked tirelessly to maintain the land he owned. And that being said, my family's paid taxes on this land for over 200 years, and I myself have never missed a payment. And I would think that probably most of the schools in the county have received at least some partial funding from the property taxes from my family's land, and being an educator, that is something I'm very proud of. So I hope you can see this property really has helped define who I am. When I was a child, my great aunt lived in Walnut Cove, and we spent lots of time here growing up with her. And my grandfather would take us out in his pickup truck out on the farm. We would play in the creeks and fly kites and look for wildlife and go fishing in the river. We could then pile into the back of his pickup truck and ride into Walnut Cove back when you were allowed to ride that way in the back of a truck. We'd eat at the Golden Skillet, and if we hadn't fought with each other too much that day, he'd take us over to the pharmacy and let us get a milkshake or some candy at the drugstore. And as a very young adult that inherited the land, I proudly carried the added responsibilities of land ownership and took it seriously, and I still do. As property owners, we want to know that our government supports us in our decision to use this land for its highest and best use. We've looked at lots of alternatives and tried to find the right one for a long time, and we believe we found that with the solar farm. We had discussed our interest in solar renewable energy with many companies over the years. Most were out of, at those time, years ago, out of California, New Mexico, Arizona. And RES has by far been the most responsive and organized of anyone we've ever spoken with regarding this, and they're North Carolina based, which was important to us. We feel a solar farm's highly respectful of our neighbors because nobody, as we've talked about, will be able to see it or hear it, and it will give us all more income. Will generate, more jobs for the community than a work crew coming in to cut the timber. And we feel like the taxes it will generate will be higher, many times higher than what the county receives now. Another reason we like a solar farm is because our son, Reeves Wilson Paley, will inherit this land one day. Solar farms are temporary, unlike subdivisions and houses, which are permanent. And if he wants to return the land to timber, when the lease is up, he can. That choice will be his at the time when he owns it and is paying the taxes on it. I've, heard that some would be worried about the agricultural footprint or that we would lose farmland, and that's not going to happen here. And we have about 100 really good prime acres that we lease now for corn and soybeans. Before that, my grandfather and then I had always leased the land for tobacco. I've maintained a farm lease on the farm since I inherited it. If this solar facility is approved, not a single acre of that farmland would be lost, and it will continue to be farmed after the Bear Branch Solar Facility was built, just as it's farmed today. The rest of our land is in timber, and that timber is now mature and ready to cut for the next stand of trees. If the solar farm's not approved, the 100% of the trees, all the way out to the road will be clear cut. If the solar farm's approved, we've happily offered to preserve an extremely substantial buffer that's been described and shown tonight around the project to ensure that nobody even knows it's back there, and Tuttle Road will be just as scenic as it is now, and it sure is. We are already planning to build our retirement home here. I've always planned on doing that, and so nobody will live closer to the solar farm than we will. And with that being said, I also would never have any interest in any kind of factory or manufacturing going on the farm up there. In summary, my family's exercised its responsibilities as property owners and caretakers of this land since our country was founded. And we believe that this solar facility is the best use for the land. We believe it's the best use for us and the best use for the county. And my husband and I very humbly ask that you respect our rights as owners and recommend it for rezoning. And we thank you so much for your time and consideration tonight. Thank you for having us.
Mr. Chairman, I want to conclude for us and then open it up to questions. But I would like to say that if perfection is your standard, no project is ever going to be approved in Stokes County. In fact, no single project that you've ever approved has been 100% perfect. There's always been an element of unknown about every single thing you've ever approved, whether it's residential, whether it's office, whether it's an institutional use, or whether it's an industrial use. It's always easy to say you want a project to be different. It's always easy to say you want it to be more. But the bottom line is, this is a great project. You don't have a room full of people here with torches and pitchforks saying don't do it. This is really a well thought out project that's being done by the right people. And having said that, we have a lot of experts here, and we're glad, and we'll stay as long as you can. You've been very respectful and very patient, and we're glad to answer any and all questions that you have. I turn it over first, I guess, to Mr. Delafield as to be our one you have a question to, but Mr. Kirkland is here to ask a question about property values. Mr. Cleveland is still here to answer any question related to health and safety. And I'll fill in on any other as I need to.
Who wants to start us off, Commissioner Morris?
That'd be fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some comments and questions that are not necessarily related to this particular solar farm, but to the process that we go through as we make these kind of decisions. Since we represent not only the property owners who want to do these kind of things, but also the folks that aren't property owners and the other residents of the county. My first question is, I understood it when we did the first solar farm, the one in Walnut Cove, Lick Creek, I think is the name of it. It was my understanding then, because we were all surprised by that. I think everybody on this board had less than a month's notice that this was coming, and most of us just heard about it because Walnut Cove had already approved half of it, or was getting ready to, before we were even aware of it. And at that time, if I'm not mistaken, I was told that that the process was the Utilities Commission would approve a solar farm, and then at some point after that, there was some kind of an advertisement that would go in the newspaper to let the local folks know that it was being approved, or it had been approved by the Utilities Commission for a certain area. And then we were told that this one had been in process for like 2 or 3 years with the Utility Commission. And then we get, about a month's notice before we have to approve it. Is that true? Am I mistaken in that process of how this works?
Anytime you invest tens of millions of dollars, you have to go through very complicated due process, due diligence to determine if the land is suitable. You have to work on the leases. You have to line up financing. There's a lot of these issues. You have to work on a power purchase agreement with Duke Energy. If any one of these elements doesn't occur in the right way, there's not going to be no solar farm. The North Carolina Utility Commission does have a very controlled statutory process for what is called a certificate of public necessity and convenience. And there is a public notice process for that. Now, just because a project had been in the planning stages for 2 or 3 years does not mean that they knew there was even going to be a solar farm. You find out somewhere later in that process if you really have a viable project, and then you file your application with the commission. Part of that is the requirement that you run an ad in what is called a newspaper of general circulation. It's a standard form. You have to do it. If you haven't done that, it doesn't get approved by the Utility Commission. But none of those, I was not involved in that project as the attorney at the Utility Commission. I was involved as the attorney for Lick Creek as we went through Walnut Cove.
Make it a kind of quick answer, so I got a lot more.
Okay, I'll be quicker. We were talking to the community well in advance. Now, it was complicated because that was half in one jurisdiction and half in another. And I think David will remember this, we had to figure out how to line up one thing or another, but we did Walnut Cove first. But that was a very, as I recall, well-known, well-advertised process. Everybody knew about it. In fact, we sent letters to people who were beyond the adjoining property line to invite people in. We had at least 2, maybe 3 neighborhood public meetings over in the library. They were very well attended. I came down. The town council asked me to come speak to them just to tell them what was going on. So it was very well known, I thought.
Well, I've never talked to anybody yet that ever saw any of these articles in the newspaper saying they were coming. So I don't think this whole process is working. I've talked to several folks in Walnut Cove. one right on the border of it, a business person down there who didn't know a thing about it till it was already completely approved by both boards.
I don't
So,
see
you
how
know,
that, well, I'm not going to dispute
so-
that. I don't see how that could have happened, but apparently it did.
And so my point is, you know, I kind of walked away from that approval and I voted for it. But when I voted for it, I also said, as far as I'm concerned, it did not set any kind of precedent for me voting in the future. I kind of walked away the impression that no other solar farms were in the pipeline. We discussed this kind of, that's why I'm asking about the process. I kind of got the impression that none had gone through the Utilities Commission, and it was a lengthy process after it did that before we would hear about it, and so nothing was in the pipeline. I'm kind of curious, I mean, did you guys know this one was coming when we were talking about that one?
I did not.
Okay.
My call from renewable energy came well after
Okay.
Lick Creek was done. And it's like, as an example, one subdivision developer is not telling another subdivision developer that they're looking at tracks here and there. They're both operating and working independently.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing you know, you have two of them up on the same agenda, and neither of them knew that. I've been in that boat many, many times.
Yeah.
And I think that's what was happening here.
Okay. Ironically, I made a comment that after we approved that one, which I was, like I said, not real comfortable with because of the short time frame we had to deal with it, I said the next thing they'll do is put one on that beautiful farm up on Tuttle Road. Damned if it ain't coming that way. So, and David, is there not an inquiry for another solar farm beyond this one on Tuttle Road, larger than this one? See, my concern, you know, and we used the term initially talking about these, are we going to be a dumping ground for solar farms? The problem, as I see it, is we don't have a policy. We haven't addressed, and Ms. Bullins was talking about this in the beginning, and we don't have a policy for addressing solar farms in our county. It's not in our ordinance. As a matter of fact, the fact that we thought there was no more coming anytime soon, that mindset, I proposed a resolution to our board, and I'll just read it real quick to you guys that may not be familiar with it. And it's a resolution about solar farms. It says, whereas the Stokes County Board of Commissioners recently approved the county's first large-scale commercial solar farm, and whereas there were many questions and concerns expressed during the zoning process as to the potential negative impacts of this solar farm on the environment and other aspects of the community, and whereas the questions posed to the solar farm developer by the Board of County Commissioners were answered, but with general answers that were inconclusive as to the actual potential negative impacts that might be caused by a large-scale solar farm. Whereas the major concern with tying up large areas of rural agricultural land for decades to accommodate a commercial solar farm, whereas there are concerns of ruining the natural scenic beauty of Stokes County, whereas it's difficult to quantify the benefits that would be afforded to the county other than the individual property owners by a large-scale solar farm when no such facilities have been located in the county. And whereas Stokes County does not consider large-scale solar farms a high-value economic development driver, whereas Stokes County desires to make decisions that benefit the county as a whole, whereas a commission has been appointed to develop a set of state standards for commercial solar farms in North Carolina, and that report is not due for 2 years, whereas a X number of years, whatever we plug in, period is needed to construct and observe the operations of the approved commercial solar farm to determine its positive or negative impacts to the county. Now be it resolved basically that we put a moratorium in of some number of years till we have a chance to do our homework, get our policy updated, get our ordinances all updated, and do additional research. And that resolution was tabled to give the planning department time to work on the ordinance and so forth. I think we said for 12 to 18 months because we didn't perceive there would be any more solar farms coming this quickly. and now it looks like there's 3. I had a call the other day from somebody who had a couple of 100 acres of land on Saratown Mountain, and they asked me who they needed to talk to about putting a solar farm over there. That gets us into the discussion about Moore's Knob and Hanging Rock Park, and what, solar farms are not, cell towers are referred to as eyesores quite frequently. Solar farms are usually not, because they're buffeted, but from aerial views, they become an eyesore as well, or they could. So, so that's my reason for proposing that. I'm not against solar farms. I'm certainly not against this one, but my approach to something that's this significant is that we need to proceed with caution before we load up with these things and really not knowing what the impacts are going to be. Just for instance, we do zoning for cell towers. That's 100 by 100 square, 10,000 square feet. David, would you describe, just like in 2 sentences, the process we go through with our consultant for doing that, for doing cell phones, towers?
Telecommunication ordinance by a third party. We adopted as part of the zoning ordinance, and it goes through the review process similar to any other rezoning petition. And there are requirements similar to decommissioning cell tower bond at the end of lifespan. That's the similarities.
Yeah, and see, in the situation he's describing there, we've had a consultant for years just on cell phone towers to make sure that we have an advocate advising us that's an expert, and you guys are all experts too, but you're all pushing the solar farm, which is what you're supposed to do. That's what you're getting paid for, I guess. But it's like, I don't know what you guys have been doing during the virus, but one of the things I've been doing is watching recurring presentations of Pawn Stars, the TV show. And the other night, Chumley was on there, and this dude comes in and wants to sell him some records. Well, Chumley pays him $300 for 2 vinyl records, and goes back and tells Rick, the owner, hey, I got a good deal on these 2 records here. And Rick said, how much did you pay for them? He said, $300. Yeah, how'd you know it's a good idea? How do you know it's a good deal? He said, he told me it was. He said, Rick says, Chumley, didn't I tell you go to the outside expert to figure out the value of stuff? You don't take advice from the guy that's selling you the record. And that's sort of an example of kind of the
One
position.
moment. Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Could you please repeat it?
No, being spied on here. Anyway, so my point is, we've got you guys side of the story on all this stuff, and I don't doubt any of your credentials and so forth, but the way we approach cell towers, and then this, this compared to 100 to 100 square foot is thousands of acres we're getting ready to have in cell towers. And so to me, that it's like the notification process doesn't really seem to be working whenever we just get a couple of weeks to approve these things, and then people, and the people out in the county are busy, our citizens are busy, and they don't pay a lot of attention to local government unless it directly affects them, and because they're busy for the most part. But then they have this habit, and I don't know if the other guys will agree with me, but they go along and not pay attention, then all of a sudden they discover something. And that's when we start getting the calls. And I can envision the calls of, why did you guys approve 5 solar farms, we didn't even know about it or whatever. So that's why I would like to see our process fixed before we approve additional solar farms. Like for the cell towers, they put a balloon up in there and everybody rides around, they see it. And then it works pretty well as far as finding out who's for it and against it. Just had one over in my neighborhood that we went through that process. So, but these guys, I rode down Total Road today to go to the golf course, and you got 3 or 4 of those little flashy little E signs that says E something on them. But beyond that, if to me, the notification process, it just needs to be part of our policy, and we need to do a better job of making sure that people are aware of what we're doing here. Let me check a couple of notes here. It's not really, I'm not complaining about our staff, the fact that we don't have a policy in place. We've kind of been surprised by these things that are starting to pour in here one after another. On these buffers, whenever you talk about a buffer and you show those nice trees and everything, what does that look like when the leaves fall off during the wintertime? Does it still hide the solar farm?
500 feet wood.
I ride around all during the wintertime here and I see all this stuff that I forgot existed during the summertime.
Right. 500 feet would conceal it.
Okay.
But concealment should not be the standard. I mean, this is somebody's, I don't think anybody should have to conceal anything that they do on their property if it's a valid use. Nonetheless, having said that, you can't, from driving down Tuttle Road, you would not be able to know it's there.
Let me see what else I wrote down here. I don't really feel comfortable and it's like I was saying with the Chumley thing. I'd like to have enough time to have. There are people with different opinions about solar farms than you guys have. I've read them in numerous places, and I would at least like to have time to let our board have some discussion with those kind of folks and have them come in and give us at least the other side of the story to think about and to help us, and to do that, to help us develop a policy, kind of like our cell tower folks would do as advocates for us. It's like somebody said tonight, the long-term impact of this cannot be determined. I mean, we're kind of all guessing at what it's going to do. On the decommissioning things, David made a comment about it being retroactive, whatever they agree to, I guess, to all of our solar farms. Where does that come from?
Well,
Is it?
that's what I was, I heard, but they haven't even got the rules. They're in the committee, and there's a lot of people on those committees, both in the business and governmental. So that's just, hearsay. That's 2 years, or 2022 is when I think the governor requires the legislation come into effect. So the assumption is that it would be that, but it's an assumption. I can't swear to it because we don't know what the rules will be. For decommissioning.
We are making that similar assumption.
Yes, and that is why when I addressed this with Tom on Friday morning, I said you might want to come up or show a plan that I knew from the last time. There are multiple plans, and that would be something the board would have to accept if they chose to go the route. We know we're going to have decommissioning. It's just what plan would be in effect. And that might be superseded. The lifespan of like I said, I won't be around, and it might be, the state says all facilities will go by our plan.
I guess in closing, it's just, like I said, it's nothing against this particular solar farm. It's just the process and the fact that we've not had time to do our policy homework. I don't like to really approve anything that we don't have policy for, because that's what we're here for, is to set policy for how the county operates. And so it appears to me like these things are all shooting in here on us before we can get our policy done. And it makes me uncomfortable about what the outcome could be. Some other folks, I know some other counties are limiting, in their policies, they limit the amount of solar coverage to a certain percentage of the square acreage of the county. We've got them coming so fast that we could exceed what percent we should approve before we even get the policy done. So that's my problem with solar farms. I'm not against this one. I'm not against approving this one in the future even. But I'm against approving any of them until we
we get our policy piece in place. So that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
If I could just comment on 2 points. One, the notification for this was exactly the same notification that every single land use change follows by your ordinance, which is totally consistent with the state statutes. So it was done that way, but as I recall, you have to get out a notice to the neighbors well before you file, and that letter to neighbors went out February the 6th, and we're only now having this meeting. So there was early notice. The second point is, as to standards, I can assure you, I have been in, I don't know how many different jurisdictions. I've done well over 100 solar farms over the last 8 or 9 years. But you are incorporating in this project all, if not more, of the standards that everybody requires, which is concealment of some sort, that you have to have equipment that's approved by underwriter laboratories, that you have to have a fence that surrounds it. You have to have some type of notification of who the property owner is, if anybody has to call. Those are the basic things. And the panels cannot be over a certain height, and these clearly are not, for what is typical maximum standard. So you already are getting in this project any ordinance that you would adopt. I am confident if you did it like everybody else, you're already getting it.
Okay. I just remember Duke Power said there'd never be any problem with coal ash, and now they're putting liners in over there in the places they store it after it's washed down the river and stirred everything up. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Commissioner Worthy, I will say I have to agree with you on a lot of what you said, and especially the main part is getting it out there. To tell you the truth, I didn't know nothing about it till the day I got my package and opened it, and I said, oh, no solar field to talk about. So don't know where I lost that along those lines. The only reason I know I probably stayed busy out of all of us sitting up here with the youngins and stuff I've got going on, but that was the first I'd heard it when I opened the envelope, so it was quite surprising. And I actually had a conversation with Commissioner Langford out in the hallway. I said, the thing is, we're hearing all the pros. I'm not hearing one con, but that doesn't mean there's not any. And that's just a little bit of concern of mine, and I'll also echo what you said. I'm not saying I'm against this by no means. I too would like to have just a little bit more time to go through some of this right here instead of before we get in over our head and having too many solar fields, and then you're riding down all these roads that we had some pretty areas before, and now you've got solar fields. And from what I understand, the attorney, forgive me, what's your name again?
Tom Carroll.
I apologize. It does sound like you're doing all you can, and the landowners and the solar companies doing all they can to hide this from everybody. So it's not the eyesore that you see. And that's definitely something I'd like to see in the future. And also talk to some of the other property owners. So, and you're telling me all the way around this whole property right here, there's no property owner anywhere in sight that can see that from their house, from the road, from the river.
No, I'm not saying that. There
Okay.
is a possibility that in January, there is a house on the western side that might be able to see it. But it's going to be, even at that time, it's very reasonably concealed, and there is a good distance. But from the road, from Tuttle Road, you won't be able to see through 500 feet of trees, even in January.
Okay.
And that's why we increased the buffer from what the county had recommended at 50 feet of vegetation. We did a 50% increase to 75, plus we added a setback from the property line to the panels to add that. And that was after speaking with Ms. Bullins. We've spoke to her during the hearing, and we're trying to, respect people who have said they do have a concern. We're trying to meet that in some way.
Okay. All right. Thank you for answering that. I have no more questions at this time. Is Commissioner Walker?
Thank you, sir.
I may be bouncing around some because my notes are not as well organized as Commissioner Morris's appear to be. So I'm gonna have to go back and kind of read a little bit myself and see at this point which questions have been answered and which questions I still have that are worth asking. I have heard, and I'd just like to hear you affirm this if you will or can, that the principals involved, the folks who do the solar panels, have established a history of integrity. They're not a, what's that old way of saying, they're not a fly-by-night company. They have a good record. They run a good operation. Have I missed anything, or I know you're probably gonna say yes, but go a little bit beyond just yes, if you will.
Let me start to answer on that. You have to finance a solar facility like this. You really have difficulty financing it if you don't have what is called a Tier 1 module. A Tier 1 module is made by a company that has a track record that's longer than 5 years. They have a reputation of standing behind their warranty. It's a company that engages in research and development. It is a company that meets certain capitalization standards in the finance industry. So all of these things come together to be a Tier 1 module. For a facility like this, only Tier 1 modules are used. Where you see Tier 2 and Tier 3 modules are in, you'll see them on rooftops of buildings. You'll see, you can find them, you find them in India. When they're recycled here, they're sent to another country. But any facility like this that is going to Duke Energy, that's a company that's investing this much, it's a Tier 1 panel, Tier 1 module.
Thank you. Don't really even need the answer. This would be for David, but you mentioned conditions for previous solar farm that we approved. Maybe this is worth asking. You said, I think, that these same conditions would apply to this one as well?
No, we recommended that the planning board recommended that the same conditions at a minimum be required for this facility if approved.
We can actually do that at this board's level, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
The
But
conditions.
what the applicant has offered is to, based on, modify those conditions in a positive manner to address concerns that they heard at the planning board meeting. That is at a minimum, if you were just going to adopt it, that would be the standard that was left for the Lick Creek facility, which we mimicked Walnut Cove. And there was a reason Walnut Cove went first, because a municipality can expand outwards. A county can't go the other direction. So that's why they had the hearing to see what the public would say about their facility, which I know had an impact on the final decision on the county's portion.
Okay, thank you, sir. And it sounds like the folks who are involved with this project have been very cooperative at each phase. I'm not hearing otherwise. Have I missed it?
These companies are professional, and Tom and I have discussed many things, and they tried to address all our issues. And again, our issues are fairly limited. It is a permitted use in our ordinance, which I don't think I mentioned, but we don't have the detail that Mr. Morris was talking about that we might have for a communication tower, or we have other standards in place. It is clumped in with other power generating facilities in that industrial district.
Right. Well, Mr. Carroll spoke of perfection, and that we don't always achieve perfection in our zoning cases that we approve, because we're dealing with humans. When we deal with humans, perfection is a little too much to expect usually, but we want to get as close as we can to getting things right. One of our planning board members had reservations, did not vote, which is unusual. But they chose to exercise that prerogative, and that was their decision. Because they assumed or thought that the panels were coming from China. Well, folks, I got tired of reading Made in China too. There's on so many things we have and buy today. But seemed like I heard that these panels are not made in China, are not likely to be made in China. And I just wanted to go back and read South Korea, which is a close ally of our country. We don't have the controversy, the contention with South Korea that we have with China. And not that I know of anyway. So that would have probably or possibly took care of the planning board members' concerns who was not comfortable in voting. So that if those concerns were truly addressed in a positive way, that would have been a firm 5-3 vote of our planning board. Well, historically, I first got into local politics in 1989. I think my wife reminded me of that the other day. And my policy, generally speaking, is to put value on what our boards present to us. And so unless there's a reason for me to go against their recommendation, a specific, clear reason, I typically like to support our planning board. They've done probably more work with this than we have. And so we did have a positive vote from our planning board. Another thing on a personal note, I've supported solar farms for years. I've been gathering information here and there, and as I mentioned at the Commissioners Conference, that was one of the sessions I chose to go to 2 or 3 years ago, learned a lot from it. But I've been picking up bits and pieces of information here and there, and you do get some negatives. I acknowledge that. Nothing is ever 100% positive anymore, seems like. So we get a lot of positives and some negatives, but it does seem to be the trend. It's where the future is. And I actually, don't shoot me for saying this to anybody. Nobody has a gun, do they? Not supposed to. But I actually hoped that Stokes County can be a leader in solar farms. And it might generate some calls. If it does, it does. But that's how I felt for years. Because we have a lot of open land. And you can still make a living from farming, but it's getting harder. It seems to me it is anyway. And not everybody wants to continue farming the family farm. So this is a way that, as Mr. Carroll mentioned, that some families can hold on to the family land. It generates income for the landowner in a very low impact way. As I listen to the concerns about solar farms, the paramount or the main concern I heard, the one that's really tangible, most tangible anyway, was appearance. Well, some crops growing on fields are not that pretty either. But solar farm is different, it's new. It caught my interest early in the process. I've been looking at it for years. And I just see some potential there. Now, as far as Commissioner Morris is concerned, looks to me like we might do 1, 2, 3, whatever, and get a first-hand feel for how it fits for our county. And if we don't hit the magic mark with the first few, that's not going to be a disaster for our county. Because we can learn, from each thing we do. And it's not permanent. I like the sound of that. You mentioned your son was probably going to inherit your farm, and if he chooses not to continue with the solar farm, there's nothing that's going to force him to. Land can go back to like it was. What about a housing development? If a housing development doesn't particularly fit an area, and I guarantee you there's people living near housing developments that would like to be living near a solar farm instead. If you have a housing development, that's final. I mean, you're not gonna tear down those houses in 30 or 40 years. One thing too that I've heard about our county is we typically as a county, I'm saying what I'm hearing again, don't shoot the messenger. We typically as a county find reasons to lag behind. And I think if we don't get on board with something like this, we're putting ourselves right back in that category of we're finding a way to lag behind instead of being a leader in a pretty innovative way. I could, if I want to take the other side, if I wanted to amen for Commissioner Morris, which I do sometimes, he remembers, but not this time. I could find reasons, I could dig up reasons to oppose it, but I'm going into this with reasons to support it because I think it's necessary. We need power. Why burn coal to get power when we can get it free from the sun? Would somebody answer that for me, please? No, you don't get a turn. Later.
Fossil fuel is what helps the common man afford fuel, afford energy.
It is, but it's going up. But I am on board, and I know some people would be disappointed if we do approve this. But there's going to be a lot of people, I think, would agree with some of the insights I'm sharing and would be disappointed if we don't approve it. There are more likely to come. If we have to step up to the plate at some point and I have to swing over in Commissioner Morris's direction, I say, well, we got enough now to really get a feel for how this might fit our county. I think if I'm still on the board, which I don't have that much longer anyway, but I could kind of see going there under certain circumstances, but I don't see it now. There's too much positive history with solar farms to ignore. They're working. This sounds like a very good location. Have I missed anything, David? I think you gave your blessing to the location pretty much. Or from
It's a good location with buffers. Is that I don't know that the other sites that were approved would be buffered as well.
Yeah.
And with the improvements that the applicant is offering, the just physical location, every location is different. This particular site has a good ability to be buffered, and if they can place it with the property owners that feel comfortable. I want to make one quick statement. We don't look at total concealment in anything. Even in stealth technology for cell towers, which we haven't required, that's a misnomer. It's just trying to disguise something to look like something else. But that's not the goal of our land use, is complete concealment. It's not practical.
Thank you. Another thing I'm looking at is when this public meeting was held, I think it was mentioned that 4 people attended. Commissioner Morris being one, the planner from Walnut Cove was another.
That's about right.
That's correct.
The 4 people attended, and I saw a list of, looked like 20 or so who were notified.
There were Ramona Tim, a planning board member in Walnut Cove, heard about it, and she just came out of interest.
Right. I know Ramona. She's interested in a lot of things. I never know where she'll show up next.
That's right.
We were talking about policy, wanting a better, stronger policy. I view our current zoning ordinances, although they don't specifically speak to every possibility. But a lot of work has been put into our ordinances to bring them to where they are. And I take some comfort in that, because even though they're not as binding or specific as they could be with certain issues like this, they're something that really brings some clarity to these situations, some specific, I better not even try that word. But they are the zoning, our zoning ordinances are set policy. And they limit what our board can and can't do. The buffers, I understand, have been increased. That was done because you were getting some feedback that there was interest in having these buffers increased, which you have. And I think, David, they go beyond the minimum by a good bit in most instances.
That's what the applicant is now proposing, and that was what my standard was. The minimum should be at least 50, and they're proposing greater buffers in all directions.
Right, which that's encouraging also. Maybe about through. I'm not going to ask about the sheep I saw in one of the pictures. For the sake of time, and in fact, I'm running out of questions, I'm going to stop there.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm interested in that sheep that you seen. I didn't see that.
You didn't?
I didn't see that. Commissioner Langford?
I've only got a couple of comments to make. Number one, for a solar farm of this magnitude, the location could not be better than where they plan on putting it. I've been up and down that road for many, many times. And Tuttle Road is ideal if you want something this large compared to the number of acres that's on that site. And with the compassion being with the family of restoring a 200-year family owned, I'm just using that, it appears to me that they put a lot of thought into this thing before they've come and recommended putting a solar farm on the land. So with that, and then the business taxes for the taxes that it will bring in, that's another plus for me. And I can't see any downsides. Can't see any downsides to what the request is. And the planning board actually voted in favor of it. So that's sort of where I stand. I'm in favor of it.
Does the board want to make a vote on it tonight?
We don't have to do that if there's, I'm saying from my standpoint, if we need to do some additional work with the planning board, needs to put together some additional information pertaining to a policy, I don't have any problems with that.
May I ask a
Yes, sir.
follow-up question? David, if we don't do it tonight, would it be 2 months before we could do it?
Well, the next planning commission hearing for commissioners is 2 months away. The question I would have is, what are you asking for? I know there's some things I deficiency, and not so much deficiency, one of the questions was notice. We would have to amend our ordinance to increase the size of notice, because I meet the legal requirements. I do all three things the statute requires. Newspaper, posting signs on the property. You saw big Z's on the property because the rain really took a beating. I posted 5 different signs on that tract of land. Then the personal certified mail notification to the surrounding property owners. The public information meeting, which is the responsibility of the applicant, is another step in the process. But as far as the actual solar farm development, I had mentioned to the board before that it's up to the board as for the land use development in the county. A threshold may be developed for how much of any one thing, in this particular case, large-scale solar photovoltaic facilities that the county may want. That would have to go through the planning board, adjusting the land use plan to specifically address a solar farm. It doesn't have that in our Stokes 2035 comprehensive plan. It hints at it in different locations where you could allow it to come in, but it's not a specific portion of the plan, and that might need to be addressed. But just generally, you're going to be looking at visual references to whatever you're placing on a piece of property. Setbacks and buffers are the things you're going to be looking at. Is the land use compatible with the area? Is the infrastructure there to support other things? Those are the basic things that are covered, you know, just in what's being presented in any plan that we give. Increasing buffers, minimum 50. You wouldn't necessarily want to increase the next one. I don't know where the next facility, although we do get a lot of inquiries. I think the reason we're getting so many inquiries, and there's credits for doing it now, because at some point in time those credits run out, and that no longer, we may never see another solar development, or we may see more. Don't know what the future holds on that. But I would need more answers from the board. Exactly what are you looking for? I can find other counties and plans, but they're going to be similar to what we're looking at here, what's already been presented as far as how you go about buffering, just like we do on any type of facility. There's certain things you can request, like we don't have a landscaping plan in the county, and that was because we've got a lot of trees. A landscaping plan in this particular site with what's proposed would not really make much difference. You wouldn't want to plant additional trees when you already had trees there. Like I said, every site is based on its own merit, and I think, Rick, when we last talked about it, that that's the way you would look at them on a case-by-case basis. But, I mean, there's other things we would need to do or could do, and I see that by listening to the hearing process, but it's a process that goes through, and it won't be, you're not really going to get all that process completed in basically a 1-month turnaround. You would need to look at it longer term. And if that's your will, once the board tells me, I'll start looking at it, but it would have to go through planning board approvals, recommendations, back to the board in a process like we did for any other zoning change that we do in the ordinance.
I'll answer his question, Mr.
I
Chairman.
still have the floor. Yes, sir.
You know that?
Right?
You sure he does?
Yeah. I just asked David the question. Anyway,
He asked us
there's
the
a
question.
few things that I'm looking at that kind of stand out. One is the public meeting produced minimal opposition. And I'm not aware of what other forms of opposition there have came about, but the level of opposition for this particular project does seem rather low. Another thing is, that I don't devalue, is our planning board met to about midnight. We're only at 10:20.
I didn't get home till after midnight. They met to about 10 to 11.
Okay, about 11.
Be on track for that.
We hopefully will make it earlier than that. But they approved it. And the one person who didn't vote sounds like if he had had the information we received this evening, that might have taken care of their reservations. It would have been a true 5-3 vote. The other thing is, based on what Commissioner Langford was saying and reflecting and what others have shared this evening, David included, this seems like a very good location, about as good as we might find for this type of project. So, and given that I have a favorable propensity, I'm having trouble with words tonight, oh well, towards solar farms, I'm on board. I would be ready to vote tonight, but I'm one of 4, and whatever the pleasure of the board is, certainly I can go along with. But I'd be ready to vote tonight if it actually came to it.
I do agree with the information we got tonight. I mean, I am willing to vote tonight if the board wants that, but Mr. Morris.
My answer to David's question is that I would like all of our policy documents that relate to these solar farms to address the solar farms specifically. And, I've asked for a moratorium, and the board can or may not do that. They haven't done anything with it yet because I don't think they realized there was urgency. But I want all of our documents because of the scope of these things. All the things that are described in the resolution, about tourism and the discussion we had originally. How many of these are you going to allow in the county to where you stand up at Moore's Knob and you just look down and you see solar panels flashing? That's not, I don't think, the direction we want to head. And now we're just kind of wandering with no policy and making the rules up as we go. I don't have any problem with accelerating the policy development in time. I mean, this looks like a good project as far as solar farms go, but I'm interested in the macro level issue of what our policy should be and getting that in place where it should be before we're making decisions on these things. And what are you going to do with this third one that's coming up the road here? Are we going to get it a month or 2 from now?
If it materializes, I mean,
You
I
know?
get inquiries a lot, but again, I think the buzz about it is the credits that are available for people to invest that amount of money into a project.
And that's another thing that bothers me about all this government subsidy. Why does it have to have government subsidy why can't it stand on its own? And it's really just a big inefficient way of generating power that takes thousands of acres of land. And I think that's why it has to have government subsidies. But there's uncertainty about, what happens to the solar farms when the subsidies go away. It can happen in one piece of legislation. So, I just think we need to have other folks besides the folks that are proposing the solar farm come and talk to our board and give us, so that we have an informed policy update that takes into account both sides. I'm not against this solar farm specifically at all, but I think we owe that to the rest of the citizens of the county. That's the way we're supposed to do business, And I don't care if we vote tonight or not. It's up to the rest of the board.
I'm fine with it.
I want to follow up.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
But I don't want to shortchange you or Commissioner Langford.
That's fine. Commissioner Langford, do you have anything to add real quick?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Well, one thing I wanted to mention is our planning board approved this with less information than we have. We have more positive information that's came to us since the planning board meeting, the additional buffers and everything. We have more to work with than they had. And they approved it with the information they had. When was your meeting, David? Thursday night. So if they're willing to step forward and they've done their job and they were willing to approve it with even less information than I have, I'm willing to go forward this evening if we have support to do that.
I'm fine to vote tonight.
Well, I'll make a motion.
One more comment for you, Dave. I agree with in concept what you're saying with the planning board. We need to support any board that we put in place, and when it's a unanimous vote, that's really easy to do. When it starts to get splitting down toward down toward half and half, then I start to have questions.
Well, Well, some of our votes are half and half.
Yeah, I know, I mean, the vote rules, there's no doubt about that. I have one other question for them before we vote too.
Yeah, Commissioner Morrison.
Yeah. What about, and I think I asked this on the first farm, solar farm, what's the guarantee we have about this thing changing hands and whoever may purchase the original deal, honoring all the terms, conditions, and commitments that are made by the group that are here now?
Tom will answer that. While you're heading up there, all the conditions that are added to this run with the land. I think David will explain that any zoning condition is permanent until you change it.
Ownership doesn't make any difference once a land use decision. Who owns the property, if a change on the land use is what we take care of, but who owns it is not of any concern to me. Maybe to you, but from a.
Well, if it's not, I mean, if a uncredible purchaser buys it, we're not to be concerned about that?
No, I didn't say that you weren't concerned. I said that I have to deal with whoever is the property owner,
Okay.
whether they're credible or not.
Yeah, okay.
They have to follow the laws.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, in short, all the conditions that are put forth by the project run with the project regardless of ownership of it. So, there's still the requirement of the decommissioning bond will be in place regardless of who owns it. That's a private agreement between the landowners, the Paleys, and this project. And so even if the project were to change hands, those types of conditions will not change. And, I don't think any of the conditions will change even if the project were to change hands because of the way that it's set up and the structure in which it's set up, similar to the zoning ordinances.
One thing that you mentioned, and I'll interject, you did state if all the approvals were not granted, then the project would go away.
That's correct.
But at that point, the Paleys could no longer, they have zoned the property to an industrial use, which doesn't allow farming. So if they wanted to go back to the way it was, then they would have to come back in and rezone the property back to, say, residential and agricultural. And that's the chance that you take, or any concern does. But it takes it, when they get the rollback, once the property, I don't know, Jake, you can answer that. Once we rezone it, is not the rollback immediate?
Yes, it starts. So
So
it'll be a
whether
roll.
the project ever gets built or not, there's going to be some ramification to the rezoning process, but the applicant, I'm sure, Tom, you've made the applicant aware of that. And it's not the intent that the project would not take place, and you wouldn't go through all this process for just a small chance that it goes through, but that is a chance that is taken.
David, I appreciate you telling me that. I didn't know they would. Thank you for the information. Before we vote, I'm just going to say one more thing just real quick, and I'll make it quick. Well, what I said earlier, I do really mean that. And also in return, I said this last time, I've always been the type of person that I've never felt like the government should be able to tell you what you can and cannot do with your property unless it was in danger of others or causing some kind of harm or anything, a nuisance to others. But I'm just a real big component on it. I just don't believe the government should be able to allow to tell people, especially something's been in the family for years. And one thing that I've heard the young lady say when she came up here was, you had no interest in putting any kind of industrial in the area, housing development. It's either this or farming, correct? Okay, that's all I have to say. If anybody wants to make a motion or have anything else to say.
I need to ask David, if I may, please, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman, how do we need to structure this motion?
Well, according to, based on the planning board recommendation, I always give you a sheet. And you have that sheet available where it starts, the statement of consistency and reasonableness of the request. And it is based on the land use plan. And I've gotten information tonight that will trigger me to ask the planning board some things on my own.
Right.
But if I am directed for further by the board, I will, pursue other things. But since your planning department consists of me and I have other duties, it doesn't happen just in a month's time, so I'll leave it at that. But you would make your statement like you did the other rezonings tonight. But you have this, and since we've gone through it, I'm assuming you've read these statements before, that the county's land use plan is based on trend zones, and this is in the O2 rural community, is to establish locations